Hey guys, tonight we were to swap places. You probably wouldn't survive a single night in their world. Your expensive hiking gear would be slipping back in time. Way, way back. We're going to a world lit only by fire and stars. A world of deep, silent forests and colossal beasts. Imagine the air, so clean and cold it hurts your lungs, the crunch of frost a joke, and your smartphone would just be a very unhelpful rock. So before you get comfortable, take a moment covered leaves under your feet. The unnerving feeling of being watched by eyes that haven't seen a creature like you into like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel find other 40,000 years. You're stepping into the Ice Age, the domain of our closest, most curious minds like yours. Go ahead and post your location and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating, enigmatic, and most misunderstood human cousins, the Neanderthals. And just a little heads up with your soft to see where everyone is tuning in from around the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ground beneath your feet is modern body and your total lack of mammoth hunting skills. You probably wouldn't last a day out here. This is not a drill. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only a frozen, crunchy carpet of fallen needles and frost-hardened mud. Each step you take seems unnaturally loud in this if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time sprawling ancient woodland. The trees are familiar yet not. Giant pines, thick-trunked birches, and Jit is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you is their gnarled oaks stand like silent, patient giants. Their branches heavy with a dusting of early winter snow. The air smells of pine smell. It's a rich, complicated perfume of damp earth, decaying pine needles, and a sharp, clean, chill resin. Damp earth, and an underlying sharp scent of cold stone. It's the smell of a world without that feels ancient. You're standing at the edge of a forest unlike any you know. The trees are giants. Thick pollution, a world that has never known industry. You pull your modern jacket tighter, but the cold seems to ignore the trunked and patient. Their branches forming a dense canopy that dapples the mossy ground in a perpetual twilight. The silence fabric, seeping directly into your bones with a patient, invasive chill. You feel fragile here. An anachronism is profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the high boughs and the distant cry of an unfamiliar bird. You a brightly coloured, soft-shelled creature, completely out of your element. There's a sound to your right. Pull the thin jacket you're wearing tighter, a useless gesture against a cold that seems to emanate from the ground, a sharp snap. It wasn't a squirrel, and it wasn't a deer, it was heavier itself. You take a tentative step forward, your soft-soled shoes sinking into millennia of fallen leaves. Every rust, more deliberate. You freeze, every nerve ending suddenly on high alert. The forest, which felt so peacefully silent a moment ago, you make sounds like a clumsy explosion in this quiet world. You feel fragile, out of place, a brightly coloured anomaly in a now feels menacingly quiet. You're being watched. You can feel it, that primal prickling sensation on the back of your landscape painted in the shades of brown and grey and deep shadowy green. You walk for what feels like an hour, pushing neck that screams of a nearby predator. You slowly, very slowly turn your head. And there he is. He's standing about 50 feet away, partially obscured by the low-hanging bough of a yew tree. He threw ferns that lick at your knees with cold dew. You're following a barely there trail. A path worn not isn't a monster. He isn't a grunting, hairy beast. He is a man, but a by-feet but by the passage of animals. You feel a primal sense of alertness tingling up your spine, a forgotten instinct man from a different mould. He's shorter than you expected, perhaps 5'6", but his sheer breadth waking from a long civilized slumber. And that's when you sense it. It's not a sound, not at first. It's a change in the pressure of the air, the sudden, unnerving feeling of being observed. You is astonishing. His chest is a massive barrel, and his shoulders are wide and powerfully built, flowing into arms thick with frieze, every muscle in your body locking up. You slowly, so slowly, scan the dense woods around you, your corded muscle. He looks less like a runner and more like a modern-day powerlifter who has spent his entire life training eyes strained to make sense of the tangled shapes of root and shadow. Nothing. You take a breath, telling yourself it's for a single, brutal event. His legs are short but thick and strong, planted firmly on the frozen ground as if they're just your imagination running wild. Then a twig snaps. The sound is sharp, definitive, and shockingly close. You'd have grown from it. He takes a step forward, out from behind the branch, and you see him clearly to your left, maybe 50 feet away. Your heart hammers against your ribs. You don't move. You barely. His face is what truly sets him apart. He has no chin to speak of, his jawline receding from a mouthful breathe. Your eyes dart towards the source of the sound, and you see a flicker of movement behind the thick trunk of an ancient oak. It's not a deer. It's too broad, too low to the ground. It's not of large, strong teeth. His forehead slopes back from a prominent bony brow ridge that hoods his deep-set eyes. Bear. The shape is wrong. For a terrifying moment your mind refuses to process what it's seeing. Then, the figure, and his nose. It's a magnificent, prominent feature, large and wide, flaring slightly as he draws in the cold steps deliberately from behind the tree and into a patch of weak filtered sunlight. And your world stops. It's air, analysing your scent. It's a face built for the rigours of an ice age, and paleoanthropologists still argues a man, but not a man. He stands perhaps 5.5 feet tall, but his width is staggering. Is whether these distinct features were purely adaptations to the cold, or if genetic drift in small, isolated populations played an equally significant role in shaping them. Perhaps it was a bit of both. He holds a long wooden shaft in one hand, its chest is a great barrel, his shoulders immensely broad, and his limbs are thick with a dense, powerful musculature that tip a wicked-looking piece of sharpened flint. He's not pointing it at you. Not yet. He's just holding your modern eyes can barely comprehend. He is covered in animal hides, crudely draped and tied, but effective. His skin is weathered and pale, crisscrossed with old scars, and his head, his face is the anchor of this impossible vision. It, a casual extension of his arm. His skin isn't the dark, leathered hide of old museum displays. Genetic evidence suggests some Neanderthals, like this one, could have had pale skin and even red hair. And low, sloping forehead recedes from a brow ridge so prominent it's like a solid bar of bone across his eyes. His nose adaptation to the low-light conditions of northern latitudes. In the filtered sunlight of the forest, you can see a reddish tint to the ears huge, a great prow of a feature dominating the centre of his face, and his jaw is powerful and forward set, with hair on his head and the thick, coarse beard that covers his lower face. He watches you with a startlingly intelligent no chin to speak of. He stands perfectly upright, a detail that surprises you, the old pictures you've seen, and assessing gaze. There's no malice in his eyes, but there is an unnerving intensity. It's the shuffling, ape-like cavemen. We're all wrong. Archaeologists still debate the nuances of their biomechanics, but look of a being who understands his world completely, who can read the subtle signs of the forest that are entirely invisible to you. The modern consensus is clear. They walked tall, with a posture as erect as your own. He just has a different centre. He is the apex, the master of this domain. This is his home. It's a fact proven by the sheer span of gravity, a different kind of power. He's holding a short, thick-hafted spear, its tip of their existence. Neanderthals, as a successful human species, thrived across the vast landscapes of Eurasia, for more than 30, a beautifully napped piece of flint the colour of cream. His gaze is fixed on you, and his eyes, deep 0.000 years, from the shores of Portugal all the way to the frigid plains of Siberia. Your set beneath that heavy brow are not dull or brutish. They are shockingly light. Perhaps a hazel or a pale grey entire civilization is but a blink of an eye compared to their tenure. He cocks his head slightly, his brow, and they are filled with an unnerving, calculating intelligence. You realise he must have been watching you for a long time, this strange, soft creature blundering through his territory. He is a Neanderthal, a name given to his kind from furrowing. His breath plumes in a thick white cloud. You stand frozen, a ridiculous statue in your brightly coloured gore of valley in Germany, where their bones were first identified, literally the Neander Valley Man. But to you, write Tex, suddenly aware that every ounce of your 21st century knowledge is utterly useless here. You can't build a fire, you can't find food, and you certainly can't fight him. He is the living embodiment of a lost world. He takes a slow, deliberate sniff of the air. He's to be about as effective as a kitten trying to intimidate a grizzly bear. The silence stretches, broken only by the whisper-wide nostrils flaring. He's probably catching your scent, the bizarre chemical smell of your soap, your deodorant of the wind through the pines. He is deciding what you are: threat, curiosity, or perhaps just something new, the synthetic fibres of your clothes. To him, you must smell as alien as he looks to you, and as in his world, that will soon be gone. He is a masterpiece of compact, brutal efficiency. As your initial shock gives way to a terrified, analytical calm, you begin to truly see his body, not as a collection of parts, but as a perfectly integrated system designed for one purpose: survival in a relentlessly hostile world. He makes the most elite modern athlete look like a fragile porcelain doll. This isn't the lean, rangy physique of a marathon runner. This is the dense, low-to-the-ground build of a creature designed to generate and withstand incredible force. Let's start with that chest. It's not just wide, it's deep and voluminous, a true barrel shape that seems almost out of proportion with his height. You've seen bodybuilders with huge chests, but that's all superficial muscle piled on a modern human frame. His is different. His entire ribcage is conical, flaring out dramatically from the waist. For decades, scientists thought this was just for attaching the massive pectoral and latissimus muscles he needed for his hunting lifestyle. But the truth is even more impressive. That enormous chest cavity housed a pair of lungs with a capacity far greater than your own. He needed them. His life was a series of intense anaerobic bursts, short, violent sprints, wrestling with megafauna, hauling hundreds of pounds of meat back to camp. His lungs could gulp down vast quantities of the thin, cold Ice Age air, fueling his muscles for those critical moments. Some scientists even speculate the sheer volume of his chest cavity helped warm the frigid air on its way to his lungs, a kind of internal furnace. His limbs follow the same principle of heat conservation and power. He is a walking, breathing example of what biologists call Allen's rule, a principle stating that animals in colder climates tend to have shorter limbs relative to their body size to minimize heat loss. His forearms are noticeably shorter than his upper arms, and his shins are shorter than his thighs. This isn't a defect, it's a feature. It lowered his center of gravity, making him incredibly stable, and it turned his limbs into powerful levers. He wasn't built for chasing prey over long distances like the newly arrived Homo sapiens were. He was built for the ambush, for the explosive close-quarters confrontation. You could probably outjog him for a mile, but in a 10-foot charge, he'd go through you like a bowling ball through tissue paper. You wouldn't even be a speed bump, and under that weathered skin and those animal hides lies a skeletal structure that would make an orthopedic surgeon weep with envy. Neanderthal bones were, on average, far thicker and denser than ours. The walls of their long bones, like the femur and humerus, were much thicker, with a smaller marrow cavity inside. This speaks to a life under constant, immense physical stress. His bones developed this way from a young age, adapting to a workload that would cripple a modern human. He likely wouldn't have understood the concept of a rest day. This incredible bone density had a quirky side effect. It would have made him a terrible swimmer. He'd have sunk like a beautifully crafted, very angry stone. A little human-shaped anchor. Now look at his hands. Even from this distance, you can see they are large. His fingers were shorter and chunkier than yours, but his fingertips were broad, with wide pads of flesh that would have allowed for a powerful, secure grip on a spear shaft or a flint core. For a long time, the mainstream historical view was that Neanderthals possessed an incredibly powerful grip, but lacked the fine motor control for delicate tasks. The thought was they had a power grip, but not a precision grip. Scholars still argue about the exact dexterity of the Neanderthal hand, but more recent analysis of their finger bones and the microscopic wear patterns on their tools suggests a different story. They could, and did, perform delicate tasks. They could hold a small flint flake between thumb and forefinger to trim a hide. They could thread sinew through a punched hole. Their grip was a masterful combination of both brute strength and surprising finesse, perfectly suited to their Mustierian tool-making traditions. He shifts his weight from one foot to the other, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but you see the coiled power in his thighs. The movement is fluid, economical. He wastes no energy. His entire life is a constant calculation of caloric intake versus expenditure. Every motion must have a purpose. You can see the scars on his arms, the weathered lines on his face, and you're reminded of a stark piece of data you once read. The pattern of injuries on Neanderthal skeletons. They show a high frequency of trauma to the head, neck, and upper body, with relatively few injuries to the lower limbs. It's a strange pattern, one that baffled paleoanthropologists for years, until someone noticed it was identical to the injury patterns of one very specific group of modern humans, professional rodeo riders. These weren't injuries from falling off cliffs or fighting each other. These were the wounds of people who regularly got too close to very large, very angry animals. He has not moved closer, he has not raised his spear, he is simply watching you, a block of solid, living potential energy. He is the master of this world, and his body is the ultimate proof. He has no concept of a gym, no need for protein powder or workout routines. His entire existence is the workout. He could probably rip your arm off in a friendly arm wrestling match, and the only surprising thing to him would be how easily it came off. The silence stretches on, and you are locked in the gaze of this absolute freak of nature, this perfectly adapted Ice Age human. He is a monument to a different path of human evolution, a path of power, resilience, and raw physical dominance, and you are a fragile, shivering twig standing before a redwood. He's still watching you, his body a statue of coiled muscle, but it's his face that now commands your full attention. It's a landscape of bone and purpose, and you realise his sensory organs are just as specialised and formidable as his physique. You're not just being looked at, you're being scanned by a biological system that is, in some ways, far superior to your own. Let's start with that nose. It's impossible to ignore. It's not just a bit large, it's a great projecting prow of a feature that dominates the centre of his face. The nasal opening in a Neanderthal skull is vast, and for a very long time, the standard explanation, the one you'd find in any textbook, was a simple, mechanical one. This was seen as a radiator in reverse. The mainstream fact has always been that this huge nasal cavity was an adaptation to warm and humidify the cold, dry air of the Ice Age before it hit their sensitive lungs. It makes a certain amount of sense. Breathing in sub-zero air directly can be damaging, so a built-in air conditioning unit seems like a good evolutionary investment. But as you watch him, watching you, a newer, more intriguing theory comes to mind. Some researchers now believe that warming the air was only a secondary benefit. The primary reason for that enormous nose was to house a sense of smell that would put a bloodhound to shame. The inside of that prominent feature wasn't just an empty space. It was lined with a vast surface area of mucous membranes packed with olfactory receptors. More receptors mean a more detailed, more sensitive perception of the world through scent. He isn't just breathing you in, he's analysing you. He can likely smell the weird synthetic chemistry of your deodorant, the laundry detergent clinging to your clothes, the processed food you ate hours ago. To his exquisitely tuned nose, you must smell like a walking chemical spill, an entirely unnatural blight on the clean, earthy scentscape of his forest. It's a wonder he isn't grimacing. Think what that sense of smell would mean for his daily life. He could track prey for miles, not by sight, but by a lingering scent trail on the breeze. He could detect a predator, a cave bear, or a lion, long before it got close enough to be a threat. He could probably smell underground tubers, or the subtle perfume of edible mushrooms hiding beneath a layer of damp leaves. It's a superpower, a constant stream of high-definition information about a world you can barely perceive. While you see a wall of trees, he smells the specific birch where a deer rubbed its antlers a day ago, the faint whiff of a wolf pack that passed through that morning, and the location of a patch of wild garlic 50 yards upwind. Then there are his eyes. They are deep set, protected by that heavy brow ridge, but the orbits in his skull, the bony sockets themselves, are significantly larger than yours. Paleontologists have found this consistently in Neanderthal skulls, from Western Europe to the Middle East. The conclusion is almost inescapable. Bigger eye sockets housed bigger eyeballs, and bigger eyeballs are better at gathering light. This was a crucial adaptation for life in the high latitudes of Pleistocene Europe. The winters were long and dark, and for much of the year, the world was cast in a state of perpetual twilight. Even in summer, life in the dense forest or at the mouth of a dark cave would have been a low-light affair. His world was dimmer than yours, and his eyes evolved to master the gloom. He could see with perfect clarity in conditions where you'd be stumbling around, utterly blind. Your bright blue jacket is probably an almost painful beacon to him, a garish splash of colour in his subtly shaded world. You must look like you've walked straight out of a badly lit rave, but this incredible night vision may have come with a hidden cost. This leads to one of the most fascinating and contentious ideas in modern paleoanthropology. Scientists still argue whether this visual specialisation was actually a subtle evolutionary disadvantage in the long run. Researchers at Oxford University have proposed that a much larger portion of the Neanderthal brain was dedicated to processing the information coming from those huge eyes. In addition, their powerful muscular bodies would have required more brain volume dedicated to motor control. The theory goes that if more of the brain's computing power is dedicated to sight and physical control, there's less available for other things, specifically the kind of complex high-level social networking that Homo sapiens seem to have excelled at. It's a controversial idea, but a powerful one. Did they trade social skills for night vision? Did their mastery of the physical world come at the expense of creating the larger, more complex social groups that would ultimately help our own ancestors thrive? He hasn't moved. He just watches, his head tilted slightly. His formidable nose twitches, taking in more data. His large, sharp eyes track the nervous flutter of your hand. He's processing you with a sensory toolkit that is both familiar and alien. He perceives this forest, this moment, with a richness and detail that you can only guess at. The world he experiences is painted in a million shades of scent, and rendered in the crisp, clear detail of perpetual twilight. You're standing in his world, but you can only see the black and white, scent-free version of it. And in his powerful, differently wired brain, he's running a calculation. What are you? Friend? Foe? Food? Or just a bizarre, brightly coloured ghost that will vanish as quickly as it appeared? The silence deepens, and you're nothing but a puzzle to be solved by his superhuman senses. The cold, which was a novelty a few minutes ago, is now becoming a serious problem. It's a deep, penetrating chill that your fancy multi-layered clothing seems helpless against. This is his world. You're just a tourist, and a badly prepared one at that. You're standing in the Pleistocene epoch, an era colloquially known as the Ice Age. The name is a bit of a misnomer. It wasn't one continuous, unbroken, deep freeze. It was a volatile, dramatic cycle of advancing and retreating ice sheets, a geological push and pull that radically reshaped the face of the planet for over 2.5 million years. The Neanderthal in front of you is a product of one of its later, colder phases. This isn't the gentle, predictable, seasonal cycle you're used to. This is a world of extremes. Summers could be surprisingly mild and short, a brief, frantic explosion of green life. But the winters were a different beast entirely. They were long, brutal, and dark, a test of endurance that culled anything weak or unprepared. Forget a bit of snow and a few frosty nights. Imagine a winter that starts in September and doesn't fully release its grip until May, with temperatures regularly plummeting to 30 or 40 degrees below freezing. From where you stand, you can't see the true titan of this world, but you can feel its presence. To the north, perhaps a few hundred miles away, lies the edge of the Great Laurentide and Scandinavian ice sheets. These aren't quaint mountain glaciers. They're continent-spanning walls of ice, in some places 2 miles thick. The sheer weight of all that ice is so immense, it has literally depressed the Earth's crust beneath it. Its edge is a shimmering, groaning cliff of blue-white ice that scrapes the sky, a slowly advancing or retreating frontier that dictates the climate for the entire hemisphere. The famous White Cliffs of Dover? They were formed during this period, not by the sea, but as the retaining wall for a colossal, now vanished glacial lake. The existence of these ice sheets created a landscape around you that is alien to the modern eye. The world here isn't a lush, dense forest like you might find in temperate Europe today. It's a mosaic. You're in a patch of boreal forest, true, with its hardy pines and birches, but this is just a sheltered valley. Just beyond this ridge, the landscape likely opens up into something utterly different. Mammoth steppe. It's an ecosystem with no modern equivalent. A vast, cold, dry grassland that stretched from Spain to Canada. It wasn't a barren tundra, it was a rich prairie, covered not in moss and lichen, but in highly nutritious grasses and sedges. This steppe was the engine of the Ice Age, the great pasture that supported the vast herds of megafauna that defined the era. This whole world operates on a different clock. The trees around you are ancient, but the land itself is a work in progress, constantly being sculpted by ice and water. When the glaciers advanced, they acted like cosmic bulldozers, scraping the land down to bedrock, carving out U-shaped valleys, and pushing up massive piles of rock and debris called moraines. When they melted during the warmer interglacial periods, they released biblical-scale floods that recarved the landscape, creating massive rivers and depositing thick layers of fertile loess soil that the wind then whipped across the plains. This constant geological chaos is a subject of intense study, and geologists still argue about the precise speed and effects of these massive meltwater events, some of which were so cataclysmic they could have raised the global sea levels in a matter of decades. Living in this world required a fundamentally different relationship with the land. You think of home as a fixed point, a house on a street in a city. For the Neanderthal, home was a territory, a vast area he knew with an intimacy you can't even fathom. He knew which valleys would be sheltered from the winter wind, where the snow would drift and where it would be scoured away by the gales coming off the ice sheets. He knew which rock overhangs would provide a dry camp, and which caves were already occupied by bears. This knowledge wasn't a hobby, it was the key to his continued existence, and it wasn't just the cold. The weather was violent and unpredictable. A calm, clear day could turn into a blizzard with terrifying speed. The winds, sweeping down from the ice sheets, were relentless and desiccating. The air was thinner and drier. Dust storms, carrying fine glacial silt, could blow for days, reducing visibility to zero and filling the air with a gritty haze. Every single day was a battle against the elements. A twisted ankle wasn't an inconvenience, it was a death sentence. Getting caught in a storm without shelter wasn't a risk of catching a cold, it was a risk of freezing solid. There was a quirky, lesser-known danger too, the sun. With the thinner atmosphere and the glare off the snow and ice, snow blindness would have been a constant threat, and a sunburn could be surprisingly severe. You almost have to chuckle at the absurdity, getting a nasty sunburn in the middle of the Ice Age. The Neanderthal remains motionless, perfectly at home in this environment that is actively trying to kill you. His entire being is attuned to it. He can read the sky, the wind, the subtle signs in the landscape that you are blind to. He knows a storm is coming in 3 hours. He knows the game trail over the next ridge will be sheltered from the wind. He knows this because he is a part of this world, not just a visitor. And as the cold continues its methodical assault on your inadequate modern body, you realise the truth. The Ice Age isn't just the setting for his story, it is the co-author. It shaped his body, his mind, and his culture. He is a creature of the cold, a master of a world you could not hope to survive. You're still locked in this silent standoff, the cold seeping into your marrow, when a sound from deeper in the woods makes both you and the Neanderthal turn your heads. It's a low, powerful thump, 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 accompanied by the cracking of branches. It sounds like something enormous is moving through the trees, something with the weight and power of a runaway truck. The Neanderthal's posture changes instantly. The casual intensity he directed at you is gone, replaced by a focused professional alertness. He's no longer concerned with you, the strange anomaly. He's listening to his world, a world populated by giants. Welcome to the Pleistocene Megafauna Show, the greatest cast of colossal creatures the world has ever seen. The animals that roamed this Ice Age landscape were not just slightly bigger versions of modern animals, they were titans, creatures of a scale that your mind, accustomed to squirrels and deer, struggles to process. The sound you're hearing is likely the footfalls of a woolly mammoth, the undisputed king of the mammoth steppe. Imagine an elephant, but bigger, shaggier, and with tusks that would make a modern elephant feel deeply insecure. A large male could stand 13 feet at the shoulder and weigh over 6 tons, covered in a thick, shaggy coat of dark hair, and powered by a constant need to eat hundreds of pounds of grass every single day. Its tusks, which could grow up to 16 feet long, weren't just for show. They were tools, used to sweep away snow to get at the buried grasses and to defend against the formidable predators of the age. And predators there were. Sharing this landscape was the cave lion, a beast about 25% larger than a modern African lion, with longer legs and a physique built for sprinting across the open steppe. They were apex predators, powerful enough to take down horses, bison, and even young mammoths. We know they were a constant presence because their bones are often found in the same caves as Neanderthal remains. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals actively hunted these great cats, competed with them for kills, or were simply hunted by them. It was likely a complex and dangerous relationship of all three. A quiet night in a Neanderthal cave could be shattered by the roar of a lion just outside, a terrifying reminder that you were never truly at the top of the food chain. The menagerie of giants doesn't stop there. There were woolly rhinoceroses, great lumbering tanks covered in thick fur, with a massive flattened horn on their snout used for clearing snow. There were the steppe bison, larger and more aggressive than their modern American cousins, with huge horns and a notoriously bad temper. Herds of wild horses, more robust and shaggily coated than modern breeds, galloped across the plains. And then there were the deer. Forget the graceful, slender creatures you know. The Irish elk, or Megalocorus giganteus, stood 7 feet tall at the shoulder, and its antlers, which it grew and shed every single year, could span 12 feet from tip to tip and weigh nearly 90 pounds. Imagine a moose, but on steroids and with a pathological obsession with headgear. Just the biological cost of growing those antlers each year is mind-boggling. Even the smaller creatures were formidable. Cave bears, which were primarily vegetarian but fiercely territorial, could be 30% larger than a modern grizzly. They were a constant source of competition for the best living spaces, caves. Many Neanderthal skeletons have been found in caves that were also used for hibernation by generation after generation of cave bears. Finding a good cave was great, but evicting the current, half-ton resident was a life-or-death proposition. And let's not forget the cave hyenas, pack-hunting carnivores with bone-crushing jaws capable of stripping a carcass clean in minutes. The mainstream historical fact is that Neanderthals didn't just live alongside these creatures, they actively and successfully hunted them. Their entire existence was interwoven with the lives and migrations of these giant animals. They were not cowering in caves, hoping to scavenge a frozen carcass. Isotopic analysis of Neanderthal bones confirms they were high-level carnivores, regularly consuming the meat of mammoth, rhino and bison. This wasn't a life of picking off the weak or the young, this was a life of confronting titans. But here's a quirky tidbit you might not know. It wasn't just the land that was full of monsters, the rivers held them too. A species of giant beaver the size of a black bear roamed the waterways of North America and Eurasia. They didn't build dams like their smaller cousins, but they were a formidable presence in the cold, slow-moving rivers of the time. Imagine fishing for trout and seeing a 200-pound beaver swim by. It would certainly make you reconsider your choice of hobby. The thumping sound fades as the mammoth, or whatever it was, changes direction and moves away. The Neanderthal relaxes slightly, but his attention is still on the forest, not you. He lives in a world where a wrong turn could lead you face to face with a lion, where the bison are the size of small cars, and where the deer have antlers wider than your living room. Every venture out from the camp was a walk through a monster movie. His senses, his body, his tools, they all evolved in response to this reality. He is not a hunter of rabbits. He is a hunter of giants. And as you stand there, feeling impossibly small and soft, you understand that his definition of a dangerous animal and yours are operating on entirely different scales. You worry about raccoons in your trash. He worried about rhinos in his front yard. It's all a matter of perspective. The Neanderthal glances back at you, a flicker of his earlier curiosity returning. But his gaze is distant, already focused on the next task. The immediate puzzle you represent is less important than the constant gnawing demand that governs every second of his life: energy. The sheer caloric burn rate of a Neanderthal was astronomical, a biological fact that shaped his entire existence. You might worry about hitting your 2,000 calorie a day target. His target was more than double that, and missing it wasn't an option. His body, a dense furnace of muscle and bone designed to operate in sub-zero temperatures, was incredibly expensive to run. Remember that short, stocky build that's so good at conserving heat, and that massive muscle mass required for wrestling with megafauna? It all comes at a cost. Modern scientific estimates, based on his body mass, activity level and the cold climate, place his daily energy requirements somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 calories. Some estimates go even higher, pushing 6,000 or 7,000 calories for a male on a particularly strenuous day of hunting and hauling meat in the dead of winter. That's the equivalent of eating about 10 Big Macs every single day, just to break even. This isn't a quirky lifestyle choice, it's a brutal, unforgiving equation. If caloric intake drops below caloric expenditure for too long, the consequences are dire. First comes weakness, then starvation, then death. There was no pantry to raid, no convenience store on the corner. Every single one of those thousands of calories had to be actively sought out, hunted, gathered and processed from a harsh and unforgiving landscape. This is the constant grind that defined his life. There were no weekends, no holidays, no retirement. There was only the hunt, the gathering, and the gnawing, ever-present need for more fuel. Let's put this in perspective. A single pound of lean meat like venison contains about 600 calories. A pound of fatty meat, which was the real prize, might contain double that. To meet his daily needs, our Neanderthal friend would need to consume several pounds of meat and fat every single day. An entire group of, say, 20 Neanderthals, men, women and children, would need to secure a massive amount of food on a regular basis. A single reindeer might feed the group for a few days. A large bison, a true bonanza, could sustain them for a couple of weeks. But a woolly mammoth? That was the ultimate prize. A 6-ton mammoth was a walking larder, a 10 million calorie jackpot that could feed a clan for an entire winter. The risk of hunting such a beast was immense, but the reward was survival itself. The pressure was relentless. Every hunt was a gamble. A successful hunt meant life, security, and a full belly. A failed hunt meant hunger, weakness, and a step closer to the edge. And hunts failed all the time. Herds moved, weather turned, spears missed their mark, and animals fought back with lethal ferocity. A hunt that resulted in a seriously injured hunter could be a net loss for the group, even if they secured the animal. They had to balance the potential reward against the risk of losing one of their vital providers. Anthropologists still debate how Neanderthals coped with these inevitable periods of scarcity. Did they have methods for preserving meat for long periods, like drying it into jerky or freezing it in natural ice cellars? Evidence is sparse, but it's hard to imagine them surviving without some form of food storage strategy. This constant energy requirement also explains the head 'em and move 'em out pace of their lives. They couldn't afford to be sentimental about a location. Once the local game had been hunted out or had migrated, the clan had to pack up and follow. Their lives were semi-nomadic, dictated by the seasonal movements of the great herds. They had their core territories, their favoured caves and rock shelters, but they were always on the move, chasing the calories. This wasn't aimless wandering. It was a calculated, strategic rotation through a known landscape, moving from one prime hunting ground to the next as the seasons turned. It's a quirky but telling detail that some of the food they ate might have been, to our minds, less than fresh. In the bitter cold of an Ice Age winter, a frozen carcass could remain edible for weeks or even months. A mammoth that died of natural causes and was quickly frozen by a blizzard would be a gift from the sky. Neanderthals would have had the sensory acuity, remember that super sniffer, to detect such a windfall from miles away. They were likely masters of opportunistic scavenging, a less glamorous but far safer way to get calories than tackling a live rhino. They probably wouldn't have turned their noses up at a bit of frost-age bison. Waste was a concept they couldn't afford. So, as you watch this individual, you must understand that behind his calm, assessing gaze is a mind constantly running a biological calculator. He sees the world in terms of energy. A herd of horses isn't a beautiful sight. It's a week's worth of calories on the hoof. A patch of unfamiliar berries isn't a botanical curiosity. It's a potential source of quick energy that must be weighed against the risk of poison. Even you, the strange soft interloper, might have been subconsciously assessed in these terms. Not as food, necessarily. Cannibalism among Neanderthals is a heavily debated topic. But in terms of energy expenditure, are you worth the effort to deal with? Are you a threat that requires a physical response? Or are you an irrelevant distraction, a zero-sum game not worth the precious calories to investigate further? His decision, for now, seems to be the latter. He has more important things to worry about. The sun is sinking lower, the shadows are lengthening, and the endless, ravenous hunger of the Ice Age is calling. He has a 5,000 calorie bill to pay, and the currency is blood, fat, and relentless effort. He turns his back on you. It's not a gesture of dismissal, but one of priority. The sun is lowering, and he has work to do. He walks over to a large, flat-topped boulder that rests near the base of a gnarled oak, a natural, snow-dusted workbench. From a leather pouch at his side, he removes 2 objects, a smooth, greyish stone the size of his fist, and a smaller, hammer-like stone. This is not a man fumbling with primitive rocks. You're about to witness a master craftsman at work, a practitioner of a technology that was so successful, so perfectly adapted to its purpose, that it remained in use for over 200,000 years. This is the Mustierian toolkit. The name Mustierian comes from the rock shelter of Le Mustier in southwestern France, where tools of this specific style were first discovered and classified. For a long time, this technology was seen as crude and static, a hallmark of the Neanderthals' supposed lack of innovation compared to the blade-based technologies of later Homo sapiens. But this is a profound misunderstanding of what you're watching. The Neanderthal isn't just making a sharp rock, he's executing a complex pre-planned manufacturing process. He places the larger stone, the core, onto the boulder. This isn't just any old rock. He would have sourced it carefully, perhaps from a riverbed or a cliff face miles from here, a place he knew yielded the best quality flint or chert. He knows its properties, how it will fracture, its internal tensions. This is expert-level knowledge passed down through generations. The mainstream historical fact is that this technique, known as the Levallois method, required significant forethought and abstract thinking. The toolmaker doesn't just chip away at a rock until a sharp edge emerges. They have to envision the final tool, the flake, while it is still inside the core, and then prepare the core with a series of precise strikes to set up that final, perfect removal. It's like a 3D puzzle, solved in reverse. He begins to work. With the hammer stone, he strikes the edge of the core, not randomly, but with controlled, deliberate force. Crack. A small flake of flint skitters away. He turns the core. Crack. Another flake. He's not shaping a tool yet. He's shaping the core. He's creating a tortoiseshell pattern on its surface, a domed top and a flat underside. Each strike prepares the platform for the next. This is the setup, the careful preparation that will determine the success of the entire operation. It's a process that modern flint knappers have spent years trying to master, and many still struggle to replicate the efficiency and elegance of Neanderthal artisans. A single misplaced blow can ruin the core, wasting a valuable piece of raw material and hours of effort. Once the core is prepared to his satisfaction, he pauses. He inspects his work, running a callous thumb over the surface. He's looking for the perfect spot to deliver the final decisive blow. This is the moment of truth. He adjusts the core, takes aim, and with a single, perfectly angled strike to the prepared platform, he detaches a large, sharp flake from the core. The flake that comes off is the prize. It's pre-shaped, with a sharp, usable edge all the way around, ready to be used as a knife or scraper, or to be further refined. This is the genius of the Levallois technique. It's a method for producing standardized, predictable flakes from a single core. It's an act of incredible efficiency. From one well-prepared core, he can produce several high-quality tools, minimizing waste and getting the most out of his precious raw materials. He picks up the flake he just created. It's about the size of his palm, thin and lethally sharp. An edge of freshly knapped flint is one of the sharpest things that can be produced in nature, sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. Now for the quirky bit. What did they do with all the tiny leftover flakes, the débetage? For a long time, archaeologists swept them aside as mere workshop debris, but closer examination of these microflakes reveals that many of them were also used. These tiny, razor-sharp slivers were perfect for delicate tasks, fine cutting of sinew, scoring bone, or making precise incisions in a hide. They were the disposable razor blades of the Paleolithic. Nothing was wasted. It's a level of resourcefulness that we, in our throwaway culture, can barely comprehend. He's not done. He takes the large flake and begins a process of retouching. Using a softer hammer, perhaps a piece of antler or bone he also pulls from his pouch, he begins to pressure flake the edge. This involves pressing the tip of the antler against the sharp edge of the flint and applying steady pressure until a tiny flake pops off. This allows for incredible control, strengthening and resharpening the edge, or shaping it for a specific purpose. He could be making a scraper for cleaning animal hides, a point for a spear, or a saw-toothed denticulate tool for working with wood. The Mustierian industry wasn't a single tool, it was an entire Swiss army knife of different implements, all derived from this same basic technological concept. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the meaning of regional variations in Mustierian toolkits. A toolkit from a Neanderthal site in France might have a higher percentage of spear points, while a site in Italy might have more scrapers. Does this reflect different cultural traditions, like a Ford versus Chevy debate for Neanderthals? Or does it simply reflect the different tasks they were performing at that specific location, a hunting camp versus a hide processing site? This is known as the Boards-Benford debate, a classic scholarly argument that raged for decades and highlights how difficult it is to interpret behaviour from stone tools alone. The Neanderthal works with an unhurried, focused rhythm. The pile of fresh flakes grows beside him. In a few minutes, he has produced a handful of brutally effective tools, ready for the evening's work of butchering game or preparing hides. You're watching a technology that armed a people for 200,000 years, a testament to their intelligence, planning, and profound understanding of their world. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fast, but it was perfectly, beautifully, and lethally effective. And it was all done without a single blueprint, a single word of written instruction, just knowledge passed hand to hand, generation after generation, in the dim light of 100,000 campfires. Now that he has his freshly napped tools, the Neanderthal moves on to his next project. He picks up the thick wooden shaft you saw him carrying earlier. It's a spear, but it's incomplete. The tip is roughly sharpened, but it's meant to be armed with one of the beautiful flint points he's just created. He could just tie it on with a strip of animal sinew, and for a long time that's exactly what archaeologists assumed they did. But you're about to witness a piece of Paleolithic chemical engineering so unexpectedly complex that it shocked the scientific community when it was discovered. He's going to make superglue. He reaches into another pouch and pulls out a roll of birch bark. It's not just any bark. It has been carefully harvested, peeled from the trees in wide, pliable sheets. Birch trees were the hardware stores of the Ice Age, providing wood for fuel, thin bark for tinder, and this thicker bark for a very special purpose. He's going to create birch bark tar, humanity's first ever synthetic material. This wasn't something you just find lying around. It has to be manufactured through a process of destructive distillation, heating the bark in an oxygen-free environment. The mainstream fact, confirmed by archaeological residues found on Neanderthal tools, is that they were producing this adhesive at least 200,000 years ago. For perspective, that's 120,000 years before Homo sapiens are known to have made it. When the discovery was first made, many scientists were skeptical. The process seemed too complicated, requiring a level of abstract thought and planning that they weren't ready to attribute to Neanderthals. How could a brutish caveman possibly master a process that resembles basic chemistry? But the evidence is now undeniable. The tar is there, stuck to their tools, a silent testament to their ingenuity. He begins the process. He needs to heat the bark to a temperature between 340 and 400 degrees Celsius. That's about 640 to 750 degrees Fahrenheit, without it catching fire. If there's too much oxygen, the bark just burns to ash. If the temperature is too low, the tar won't render. It's a delicate, smoky art. He digs a small pit in the cold earth. He might line it with a larger piece of bark to create a crude container. Into this pit he tightly packs the rolls of birch bark he's prepared. Then he builds a fire, not in the pit, but on a stone slab over the pit, creating a lid and sealing the bark inside a makeshift underground oven. As the fire heats the chamber from above, the bark inside begins to smoulder and break down in the low oxygen environment, releasing a thick, black, pungent goo that drips down and collects at the bottom of the pit. Archaeologists and experimental replicators still argue about the precise methods Neanderthals used. Did they use this simple pit-kiln method? Or did they have more sophisticated techniques, perhaps involving two containers, one inverted over the other, to better collect the tar? The truth is, we don't know for sure, as the archaeological traces of such a process are incredibly faint. But what we do know is that they did it successfully, time and time again. This wasn't a lucky accident. It was a standardized, repeatable technological process. The whole procedure takes hours. The fire has to be carefully tended, kept at a consistent temperature. It's a slow, smelly and boring job. Maybe this is what the younger members of the clan were tasked with. The tedious but vital job of tar making. It's a bit like a modern teenager being told to watch a pot on the stove, except if you mess it up, your dad can't fix his spear and might get gored by a rhino. So, slightly higher stakes. Hours later, after the fire has died down and the pit has cooled, he carefully excavates his prize. At the bottom of the hole is a small, precious lump of black sticky tar. It's more valuable than the flint or the wood, because it's a force multiplier. It's the technology that binds other technologies together. He takes a gob of the warm, pliable tar on the end of a stick. It smells acrid, like a modern asphalt road, a smell of pure industrial potential. He takes one of his finest flint points and carefully sets it into the notched end of the wooden spear shaft. Then, with the stick, he liberally applies the warm birch tar all around the join, packing it into every crevice. The tar acts as a powerful adhesive, but it also provides a shock-absorbing flexible buffer. He then takes a long, thin strip of animal sinew, perhaps from a deer's leg, and begins to tightly wrap it around the tarred hafting. As the sinew dries, it will shrink, cinching everything down with incredible force. The tar, now cooling and hardening, will hold the sinew in place and waterproof the joint. The finished product is a thing of lethal beauty. The flint point is now seamlessly integrated with the wooden shaft, not just tied on, but bonded. It won't wobble, it won't twist on impact. It's a solid, reliable, and deadly weapon component. Now here's the quirky part. Analysis has shown that Neanderthals often cheated a little. They sometimes mixed other ingredients into their tar, like beeswax to make it more workable, or powdered ochre. Why the ochre? It's possible the iron oxide powder acted as a filler, adding bulk and perhaps even some structural integrity to the glue. Much like modern epoxies are mixed with fillers, is a level of recipe tweaking and material science that is simply astounding for the time period. He holds up the finished spearhead, inspecting his work in the fading light. The combination of a perfectly knapped stone point, a straight and sturdy wooden shaft, and this incredible, home-brewed superglue creates a weapon that is far greater than the sum of its parts. This is technology. This is foresight. This is chemistry. It's a quiet, profound act of genius, performed by firelight at the edge of a frozen world, and it completely shatters the old tired image of the Neanderthal as a simple-minded brute. He wasn't just a caveman, he was an engineer. He holds the newly hafted spear in his hand, feeling its weight, its balance. It's a formidable weapon, a masterpiece of Paleolithic engineering from the superglued tip to the polished wooden shaft. But now a new question hangs in the cold air, a question that has been the subject of one of the most vigorous and long-running debates in paleoanthropology. How exactly did he use this weapon? Was this a simple, brute force stabbing spear, or was it something more? The classic mainstream view for many years was that Neanderthals were limited to thrusting spears. The image is a powerful one, a group of brave, incredibly strong hunters getting up close and personal with a giant beast, using their immense upper body strength to drive the spear point home. This weapon, often called a lance or thrusting spear, would have been thick and heavy, designed to withstand the violent thrashing of a wounded animal. Proponents of this theory point to the Neanderthals' powerful build, perfectly suited for this kind of close-quarters combat. They also point to the nature of their injuries, those rodeo rider patterns, of head, neck and torso trauma, as evidence of a life spent dangerously close to flailing hooves and horns. This thrusting spear model paints a picture of incredible bravery and brute force. Imagine trying to hunt a steppe bison, a 2,000-pound mountain of muscle and fury with what is essentially a sharpened pole. There's no room for error. You have to get inside the animal's guard, deliver a fatal thrust to the vital organs, and then get out before it gores you, tramples you, or turns you into a prehistoric pancake. This was the accepted truth for decades, a foundational piece of the Neanderthal story. It fit neatly with the narrative of them being strong but perhaps less clever than the Homo sapiens, who would eventually replace them, who were known to have lighter, more advanced projectile weapons. But as you watch him test the feel of the spear, another possibility emerges, a more nuanced and complex one. In recent years, this thrusting-only model has been seriously challenged. The Great Spear debate rages on, with scholars lining up on both sides, armed with archaeological finds, experimental replicas, and biomechanical models. The question is no longer if they had spears, but whether they had mastered the art of throwing them. The evidence for throwing is subtle but compelling. Some of the stone points found at Neanderthal sites, once thought to be too large and heavy, have been re-examined. When hafted onto a properly balanced shaft, they are not clumsy lances at all. Experimental archaeology, where researchers create and use replicas of these spears, has shown that they are surprisingly aerodynamic. A well-made Neanderthal spear can be thrown with considerable accuracy and force, capable of penetrating the thick hide of a large animal from a distance of 15 or 20 metres. That's not a sniper rifle, but it's a whole lot better than being close enough to smell the bison's bad breath. Further evidence comes from the microscopic wear and impact fractures on the ancient stone points themselves. Some of these fractures are consistent with the kind of high-velocity impact that comes from a thrown weapon, rather than a hand-delivered thrust. The physics are different, and they leave a different signature on the stone. Ballistic analysis, a field usually reserved for crime labs, is now being used to study 50,000-year-old crime scenes, trying to determine the cause of death for long-vanished rhinos and horses. So, could they throw? The answer is likely yes. But the quirky, and perhaps more accurate way to think about it, is that they probably didn't have a rigid distinction between thrusting and throwing spears. A single, well-made spear could likely serve as both. It could be thrown from a safe distance to wound and slow down an animal, and then used as a powerful thrusting weapon to deliver the final, killing blow once the beast was weakened or cornered. It was a versatile, multi-purpose tool, not a specialised one. Why carry two spears when one can do both jobs? It's the Neanderthal way, efficient, practical, and brutally effective. This debate opens up a fascinating window into their hunting strategies. A group of hunters armed with throwing spears could be far more sophisticated. They could coordinate their attacks, with some individuals driving the prey towards others lying in ambush. They could use the terrain to their advantage, throwing spears from the safety of a ledge or across a ravine. It suggests a level of tactical planning and communication that the old brawny caveman with a stick model simply doesn't allow for. The Neanderthal in front of you gives the spear a final, expert heft. He holds it not at the centre of balance, but further back, in a grip that could be used for either a powerful underhand thrust or a short javelin-like throw. He is the living answer to the debate, but he's not talking. His knowledge is in his muscles, in the intuitive, practiced feel of the weapon in his hand. He knows its capabilities, its limitations. He knows exactly how far he can throw it to hit a target the size of a reindeer's heart, and he knows precisely where to thrust it to sever an artery. This knowledge is his most valuable possession, more precious than flint, more vital than fire. As the last light of day paints the underside of the clouds in shades of orange and purple, he shoulders his spear. It's not just a weapon. It's the culmination of his people's intelligence, the foresight of the Levallois technique, the chemistry of the birch tar, and the hard-won ballistic knowledge passed down through 1,000 generations of hunters. Whether thrust or thrown, it is the tool that feeds the clan. It is the tool that keeps the giants at bay. It is the key to his survival. With his spear hafted and his tools made, a sense of purpose settles over the Neanderthal. The day's preparations are done, but the day's most important task, dinner, is still waiting. He turns and strides with a rolling, powerful gait toward a shallow overhang on a nearby rock face, a place you hadn't even noticed. This is a temporary camp, a satellite location to the main cave, and the remnants of his recent success are there. Lying on a bed of ferns is a large section of an animal carcass, likely a reindeer or a large horse. The air, already cold, now carries the rich coppery scent of fresh meat. You are looking at the foundation of his world. For a very long time, the prevailing image of the Neanderthal diet was simple: meat, more meat, and for dessert, a bit of meat. This view was based on the sheer volume of animal bones found at their sites, and early, less sophisticated chemical analyses of their remains. The mainstream historical fact, which has been refined but remains fundamentally true, comes from stable isotope analysis of Neanderthal bone collagen. By analysing the ratios of nitrogen isotopes, specifically nitrogen-15, in their bones, scientists can determine their trophic level, their position in the food chain. The results are astonishing. Consistently, from Spain to Russia, Neanderthals show nitrogen isotope levels that are as high as, or even higher than, those of the top carnivores they lived alongside, like wolves and hyenas. This doesn't just mean they ate meat, it means they ate a lot of meat, and specifically the meat of large herbivores. They weren't just nibbling on rabbits, they were systematically hunting and consuming the biggest, most calorie-rich animals in their environment: mammoth, rhino, bison, horse, and reindeer. They were, for all intents and purposes, the apex predators of the Eurasian Ice Age. This diet was a necessity, driven by that brutal caloric equation you were thinking about earlier. Plants were available, especially during the short summers, but in the depths of a Pleistocene winter, the landscape was a frozen pantry. The most reliable, energy-dense food source available year-round was on the hoof. Fat, in particular, was the gold standard. A pound of animal fat contains more than double the calories of a pound of lean protein. Neanderthals would have prized the fatty parts of an animal, the marrow, the brain, the organ meats, above all else. The lean muscle meat, which we often value most today, might have been of secondary importance to them. This is a diet that would make a modern keto enthusiast look like a rank amateur. He kneels by the carcass and with one of his freshly made Mustierian flakes begins to butcher it. His movements are economical and precise. He's not hacking away. He's using the razor-sharp flint edge to slice through muscle and tendon with practiced ease. The evidence for this kind of expert butchery is all over the archaeological record. Animal bones found at Neanderthal sites are covered in fine, linear cut marks made by flint tools, often located around the joints, showing that they were systematically disarticulating the animals. They also frequently smashed open the long bones, like the femur and humerus. This wasn't random violence. They were deliberately cracking them open to get at the rich, fatty bone marrow inside, a Paleolithic delicacy packed with calories. A little brain food for thought. But here's a quirky and slightly grisly tidbit about their apex diet. There is evidence that their meat-heavy lifestyle may have occasionally included each other. At sites like El Cedron in Spain and Moulin-Guercy in France, Neanderthal bones have been found with the same cut marks and deliberate fractures as the animal bones alongside them. It's clear evidence of cannibalism. The big debate among scholars is, why? Was it ritual cannibalism, part of a complex funerary practice, where consuming a part of the deceased was an act of reverence? Or was it nutritional cannibalism, a desperate act of survival in times of extreme starvation, where a neighbouring rival clan might be seen as the only available food source? Or perhaps it was something else entirely, an act of aggression against enemies. The evidence is macabre and undeniable, but the motive remains shrouded in mystery. As you watch him work, you realise that his entire life, his society, was structured around this carnivorous diet. The hunt was the central organising principle of his group. It required cooperation, communication and planning. The division of labour, the sharing of food, the very location of their camps, it all revolved around the pursuit and processing of large animals. This wasn't a choice, it was an adaptation. Their bodies, their tools, and their social structures were all finely tuned to a life at the top of the food chain. However, the Neanderthals as hypercarnivores story is not the whole story. While meat was undeniably the main course, recent discoveries have begun to add more colour and variety to their menu, revealing a diet that was more flexible and sophisticated than previously believed. But for now, in the fading light of this cold evening, the reality is clear. The Neanderthal before you is a master butcher, processing the spoils of a successful hunt. The scent of blood and fat is the smell of security, the perfume of a full belly and another day survived. He expertly cuts a large steak-like portion of meat from the carcass, perhaps from the thigh or the backstrap. He impales it on a sharpened stick. The fire pit nearby, lined with stones, still has a deep bed of glowing embers from a previous fire. He doesn't need roaring flames. The intense radiant heat from the coals is perfect for cooking. He props the stick near the embers, and soon the sound of sizzling fat joins the quiet sounds of the forest, a comforting, timeless melody. Dinner is served. The smell of roasting fat fills the small rock shelter, a rich, savoury aroma that speaks of success and survival. The Neanderthal sits on his haunches by the glowing embers, turning the stick so the meat cooks evenly. The sound is a gentle sizzle, a peaceful domestic sound that belies the violence required to obtain it. As you watch him calmly eat the fire-kissed meal, a slab of pure protein and energy, your mind can't help but drift. You imagine the scene not of the aftermath, but of the acquisition. You're no longer standing at the quiet camp. You're on the windswept steppe, hours earlier, and you're about to join the hunt. There are 5 of them, not just the one you met. 2 other males, as broad and powerful as he is, and 2 females, slightly smaller but just as robust and clearly just as capable. They are spread out in a loose semicircle, using a shallow, rocky ravine as a natural trap. Their prey is cornered. It's a mature steppe bison, a 1-ton behemoth of muscle, horn, and foul temper. It stands with its head low, its shaggy fur matted with sweat and dirt, its breath coming in great steaming snorts that cloud the frigid air. Its horns, thick and lethally sharp, scrape against the rock wall as it pivots, looking for an escape route that isn't there. This is not a chaotic, desperate mob. This is a team of specialists executing a plan. The mainstream historical fact about Neanderthal hunting comes from the stark evidence left on their bones. Analysis of healed fractures on their skeletons reveals a pattern of trauma heavily concentrated on the head, neck, arms, and torso. For years this was a puzzle, until researchers realised it was a near-perfect match for the injury patterns of modern professional rodeo riders. These are the injuries you get when you're thrown, kicked, and trampled by very large, very powerful animals. This is the price of close-quarters hunting. The hunt begins not with a thrown spear, but with sound and pressure. The hunters slowly close the semicircle, clapping, shouting guttural calls and banging rocks together. Their goal is not to kill the bison from afar, but to manage its panic, to keep it disoriented and pinned in the ravine. Archaeologists still debate the exact level of strategic complexity in these hunts. Were they meticulously planned ambushes using sophisticated signals, or were they more opportunistic, relying on instinct and intimate knowledge of animal behaviour? Watching the scene unfold, it seems to be a masterful blend of both. The bison, enraged and terrified, makes a choice. It charges. It doesn't pick the group but one individual, one of the other males. The earth seems to tremble as it thunders forward. This is the moment of truth. The targeted Neanderthal doesn't run. He holds his ground, spear held low, and at the last possible second, he sidesteps with an agility that seems impossible for his stocky frame. As the bison thunders past, he and the hunter next to him lunge forward in a coordinated movement, driving their heavy spears into the beast's flank. These are not light, flimsy javelins. They are thick shafts of wood with heavy stone points, designed to punch through thick hide and muscle and cause massive internal damage. The bison bellows, a sound of pain and fury that echoes off the ravine walls. It stumbles but doesn't fall. It spins around, impossibly fast, and now the real dance begins. It's a chaotic ballet of feints and lunges. The hunters are a whirlwind of motion, darting in to deliver a thrust, then scrambling back to avoid the sweep of those deadly horns. A quirky but vital part of their strategy appears to be targeting the hindquarters and flanks, aiming to hamstring the animal, to bleed it, to rob it of its power and mobility before attempting the final kill. Then it happens. The bison, in its thrashing, catches the first hunter you met on the shoulder, with the flat of its horn. He isn't gored, but the sheer force of the blow sends him flying. He lands hard, 10 feet away, a sickening crunch echoing in the cold air as his ribs and collarbone break. He's tossed like a rag doll, a testament to the incredible power they are confronting. Another hunter immediately moves to draw the bison's attention, saving his injured comrade from being trampled. The injured hunter, groaning, doesn't cry out. He clutches his arm and begins to drag himself to safety. He will be out of the hunt for weeks, a burden on the clan, but they will care for him. This is the risk, the price of every meal. The bison is weakening now, its shaggy coat slick with blood. Its movements are slower, more sluggish. The remaining hunters press their advantage. They get in closer, driving their spears home with grunts of exertion, aiming for the vital organs in the chest cavity. Finally, the great beast stumbles to its knees, then collapses onto its side with a great shuddering sigh. The hunt is over. The silence that follows is broken only by the ragged breathing of the hunters and the wind whistling through the ravine. The vision of the brutal, chaotic hunt fades. and you're back at the rock shelter. The Neanderthal finishes the last piece of roasted meat, chewing thoughtfully. He wipes the grease from his mouth with the back of his hand. There are old, faded scars on that hand, and a fresh set of deep scratches on his forearm. He looks at his spear, resting against the rock wall. He looks at the rest of the carcass. The cost of that quiet, satisfying meal was a dance with death in a rocky ravine. This is the brutal reality of a life lived up close and personal with the giants of the Ice Age. Every full belly was paid for with courage, skill, and, more often than not, a measure of blood and bone. The Neanderthal finishes his piece of roasted bison, a meal earned through incredible risk and effort. For decades, the story would have ended there. The image of the Neanderthal as a hyper-carnivore, a specialist hunter, living almost exclusively on the meat of large beasts was the dominant narrative. It was a simple, powerful story supported by the nitrogen isotope data and the massive bone piles at their campsites. But as you watch him, he does something unexpected. He reaches into a small pouch made of hide and pulls out a handful of what look like small roasted seeds, popping them into his mouth with an air of casual familiarity. This small act represents a quiet revolution in our understanding of Neanderthal life. The idea that their diet was more than just meat is not just speculation anymore, it's a scientific fact, proven by a new generation of archaeological techniques. The mainstream view has shifted dramatically in the last 2 decades. Scientists now analyse something far more subtle than bones, the dental calculus or plaque, scraped from the fossilised teeth of Neanderthals. This hardened plaque is a microscopic time capsule, trapping tiny fragments of everything an individual ate. It's the ultimate form of dietary DNA. Analysis of this dental calculus has opened up a whole new menu. Inside the plaque of Neanderthals from Spain to Belgium, scientists have found the starch granules of various plants. They were eating grasses, legumes, and the roasted rhizomes and tubers of water lilies. They were clearly knowledgeable about the plant world, aware of which roots were edible, and even cooking them to make them more digestible and nutritious. They weren't just mindlessly chewing on whatever leaves were nearby. They were harvesting and preparing plant foods. But the surprises don't stop there. The same dental plaque has revealed the microscopic spores of mushrooms. It seems our Neanderthal cousins were also avid mycologists, taking advantage of the fungal bounty of the forest floor. Given the number of poisonous mushrooms out there, this implies a sophisticated trial-and-error knowledge passed down through generations. They weren't just surviving, they were exploiting a wide range of food resources. You can almost picture a Neanderthal elder teaching a youngster, "No, not that one. That one makes you see the angry sky mammoth. Eat this one instead." The debate among scholars is no longer if they ate plants, but how much plants contributed to their overall diet. Was it a significant source of calories, or just a seasonal supplement? A bit of dietary garnish to go with the main course of mammoth steak? The answer likely varied dramatically based on location and season. Neanderthals living in the richer, more temperate woodlands of the Mediterranean would have had access to a much wider variety of plant foods year-round than their cousins living on the frigid mammoth steppe of the north. They were not a monolith. They were adaptable, flexible eaters who tailored their diet to their local environment. And now, for a truly quirky tidbit that shatters the old inland hunter stereotype. At sites like Vanguard Cave in Gibraltar and Figueira Brava in Portugal, archaeologists have found evidence that Neanderthals were exploiting marine resources. They were eating mussels, limpets, and seals. They were even hunting dolphins, butchering them on the beach. They waded in the shallows, harvesting shellfish at low tide, and likely timed these activities with the cycles of the moon. This is a level of ecological awareness that is profoundly modern. They weren't just hunters of the steppe. They were also beachcombers of the coast. They were surf and turf connoisseurs, 100,000 years before the first restaurant was ever conceived. This more complex dietary picture changes our understanding of their daily lives. It means that not every day was a high-stakes life-or-death bison hunt. There were also quieter days spent gathering, digging for roots, collecting shellfish on the shore. These activities might have been less glamorous, but they were a vital and likely more reliable source of nutrition. It also suggests a different social dynamic, perhaps with members of the group specialising in different tasks, the strong young men focusing on the big game, while others focused on gathering plants and smaller resources. The Neanderthal in front of you finishes his handful of seeds. He then gets up and walks to a small trickle of water seeping from a crack in the rock face, cupping his hands to drink. The water is clear and cold. But analysis of that same dental calculus from a Neanderthal at the El Sidron site in Spain revealed something amazing. Trapped in the plaque were chemical markers for poplar, a tree whose bark contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, and the mould penicillium, the source of penicillin. This individual had a painful dental abscess and a stomach bug. It seems he was treating himself, chewing on bitter poplar bark for the pain-relieving properties and perhaps accidentally or intentionally consuming mouldy plant matter for its antibiotic effect. This is not just diet, this is self-medication. This is Paleolithic pharmacology. The Neanderthal finishes his meal and his drink. The fire has burned down to a deep, mesmerising bed of coals that casts a warm, orange glow across the rock shelter. The wind picks up outside, a low, mournful howl that accentuates the feeling of safety and warmth within this small pocket of domesticated space. He settles back against the rock wall, not with the exhaustion of a brute, but with the quiet contentment of a man at home. In the flickering light, you notice another figure stirring from the shadows at the back of the shelter. It's the hunter who was injured in the confrontation with the bison. He's lying on a bed of dry moss and ferns, his arm bound in a crude but effective splint made of bark and leather straps. His face is etched with pain, but he is alive, and he is not alone. One of the females from the hunting party is with him, gently adjusting the furs that cover him. She offers him a piece of meat, not a tough steak, but a softer piece of organ meat, easier for him to chew. He accepts it with a grateful nod. This simple, quiet scene of care shatters one of the oldest and most persistent myths about Neanderthals, that they were brutish, selfish creatures who lived by a survival of the fittest, ethos where the weak were left to die. The truth, as revealed by the fossil record, is far more moving. You're witnessing an expression of what archaeologists call compassion, a trait we often reserve for our own species. The mainstream historical fact is that Neanderthals systematically cared for their sick, injured, and elderly. The evidence for this is written directly onto their skeletons. Many Neanderthal remains show signs of severe, debilitating injuries, broken bones, withered limbs, blindness, that had healed over time. These were not injuries that an individual could have survived on their own in the harsh Ice Age environment. Take, for example, the famous Old Man of La Chapelle-aux-Saints, a fossil found in France in 1908. This individual was old for a Neanderthal, perhaps in his 40s. He had lost most of his teeth and suffered from crippling arthritis in his spine. He would have been unable to hunt or even properly chew his food. Yet, he lived for years in this state. For him to have survived, others in his group must have been hunting for him, protecting him, and possibly even chewing his food for him to make it digestible. This isn't the behaviour of a brutish every-man-for-himself society. This is the behaviour of a close-knit family, a clan bound by powerful social bonds of obligation and empathy. Another stunning example comes from Shanidar Cave in Iraq. The remains known as Shanidar one belonged to a man who had suffered a crushing blow to the side of his head when he was young, which likely blinded him in one eye and damaged his brain. He also had a withered right arm that had been amputated above the elbow, and severe injuries to his legs that would have made walking difficult and painful. He was, by any measure, severely disabled, yet he lived to be around 40 or 50 years old. He was a lifelong patient, a member of the group who could not have contributed much to the hunt, but they kept him alive for decades. His clan was his social safety net, his prosthetic. Why would they do this? From a purely utilitarian standpoint, caring for a non-productive member of the group seems like a waste of precious calories. Scholars still debate the motivations behind this compassionate behaviour. Was it purely emotional, an expression of love and kinship for a family member, or was there a more practical reason? Perhaps an old, experienced individual like the Man of La Chapelle, while unable to hunt, was a living repository of knowledge. He knew the ancient migration routes, the best places to find flint, the stories and traditions of the clan. His wisdom was more valuable than his physical strength. He was a library, and it was worth the cost of feeding him to keep that library open. It was likely a combination of both, a blend of pragmatic self-interest and genuine affection that we would recognise in our own families. This sense of community and care extends beyond just injury and old age. The injured hunter in your vision is not just being kept alive, he's being actively treated. The splint on his arm is a piece of Paleolithic medical technology. And remember the Neanderthal from El Sidron who was self-medicating with poplar bark. He wasn't just guessing. He was likely using a body of medicinal knowledge held and shared by the group. This is healthcare, in its most fundamental form. A quirky and deeply touching piece of evidence for their social bonds comes from the realm of childhood. At the site of La Ferracie in France, the remains of a Neanderthal child, about 2 years old, were found buried in a shallow grave. The way the bones were arranged suggests it was a deliberate, careful burial. It's hard to look at evidence like that and not feel a sense of shared humanity across the vast gulf of time. The grief of a parent who has lost a child is a primal, universal emotion. These were not unfeeling beasts. They were people who loved and who mourned. As the female tends to the injured male, the first hunter, the one you met in the woods, watches them for a moment. There's no complex conversation, no grand pronouncements. There's just a shared understanding. They are a unit. They survive together, or they die alone. The strength of their group is not just in their powerful muscles or their sharp spears, but in the invisible threads of cooperation and compassion that bind them together. They are a clan of care, a small fragile island of warmth and mutual support in the vast cold ocean of the Ice Age. And in this quiet moment of tenderness you see a reflection of the very best parts of your own humanity, a legacy of empathy that is far older than you ever imagined. So, the image of the single-minded carnivore dissolves, replaced by a much more sophisticated and adaptable omnivore. He was a master of his entire ecosystem, from the largest mammoth to the smallest mussel, from the most nutritious root to the most medicinal bark. He ate what was available, what was smart, and what was necessary. Meat was the fuel that powered his Ice Age furnace, but his world was seasoned with a rich variety of other flavours, textures, and even medicines. He had a broader palate than we ever gave him credit for. In the warm glow of the embers, you see another member of the clan who had been sleeping stir and sit up. It's a child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. He yawns, rubs his eyes, and crawls over to sit beside the hunter you first met, leaning against his sturdy frame for warmth and reassurance. The hunter puts a casual protective arm around him. It's a simple, universal gesture of paternal affection. But the life of this small boy will be nothing like the childhood you know. It will be short, compressed, and brutally demanding. The mainstream historical fact about Neanderthal development is that they grew up incredibly fast. By studying the microscopic growth lines in their teeth, which, like tree rings, lay down a new layer every day, scientists can determine the age of an individual with remarkable precision. And the story these teeth tell is one of haste. A Neanderthal child's teeth erupted earlier than a modern human child's. Their brains also reached adult size much more quickly. A Neanderthal at age 8 would have had a brain the size of a modern adult's, while a Homo sapiens child of the same age is still years away from that milestone. By the time they were 15, they were likely fully grown, physically mature adults. This accelerated life history was a harsh necessity. In a world fraught with danger, where life expectancy was short, rarely extending beyond 40, there was no time for a long, protected childhood. You had to grow up fast, learn fast, and become a contributing member of the clan as quickly as possible. The period of playful, innocent discovery that we consider a birthright was a luxury they couldn't afford. Childhood was a compressed apprenticeship for a very difficult adulthood. From the moment he could walk, this young boy would have been learning. His play would have been practice. Throwing rocks at a tree wasn't just a game, it was training his aim for the hunt. A game of hide-and-seek in the woods wasn't just fun, it was learning the landscape, how to move silently and how to find cover. He would have spent hours watching the adults, like the hunter beside him, as they knapped flint. He would start with a clumsy hammerstone and a piece of poor-quality flint, learning the angles, the feel of the rock, the devastating frustration of a misplaced strike that shatters the core. His first successful flake would have been a major milestone, a step toward becoming a provider. Scholars still debate the exact nature of Neanderthal education. Was it a formal process of instruction, or did children learn simply by observation and imitation, what's known as situated learning? Given the complexity of tasks like Levallois tool-making and birch tar production, it's hard to imagine it was purely observational. There must have been some form of active teaching, a master-apprentice relationship between the elders and the young. You can almost hear the grunted corrections. No, Not there. Strike here. The life of a Neanderthal child was also filled with constant low-level labour. They would have been responsible for gathering firewood, fetching water, collecting edible plants and mushrooms close to the camp, and tending the fire. These weren't chores to build character. They were essential contributions to the group's survival. Everyone had a job to do, regardless of their age. Here's a quirky and rather sobering aspect of their childhood. Their skeletons show they started a life of hard labour very early. The bones of Neanderthal children and adolescents show signs of stress and strain, evidence of carrying heavy loads and engaging in physically demanding activities long before their modern counterparts would. They also show the same kinds of minor injuries, nicks and cuts from flint tools, as the adults, suggesting they were involved in butchery and hide processing from a young age. There was no kids' table. They were right there in the thick of it, their small hands learning the bloody work of survival. And the dangers were ever present. A child wandering too far from the safety of the campfire could be snatched by a hyena or a lion. A fall could mean a broken bone that might never heal properly. Childhood diseases for which they had no medicine beyond the clansfolk knowledge could be a death sentence. The high rate of infant and child mortality is a grim reality of the Paleolithic. Many of the burials found at Neanderthal sites, like the one at La Ferrassi, are of children. Surviving to adulthood was not a guarantee, it was an achievement. The young boy leans his head against the hunter's shoulder, his eyes heavy with sleep. He is safe for now, wrapped in the warmth of the fire and the security of his clan. But his world is not a gentle one. He has probably already witnessed the bloody aftermath of a successful hunt scene, the grim reality of a debilitating injury, and perhaps even felt the sorrow of losing a sibling or a playmate. His innocence, if it ever truly existed, is a thin veneer over a core of hard-won knowledge about the brutal realities of his world. His childhood is a race against time, a race to grow strong enough, skilled enough, and knowledgeable enough to survive before the unforgiving world claims him. He must learn to read the tracks of a bison, to distinguish an edible mushroom from a poisonous one, to feel the flaw in a piece of flint, and to understand the complex social rules of his clan. It is a curriculum written in blood, stone, and fire, and looking at his small form you realise that the survival of the Neanderthals rested not just on the strength of their hunters, but on the resilience and rapid maturation of children like him. The fire in the rock shelter has now burned down to a deep bed of crimson embers, pulsing with a life of their own. The child is asleep, nestled against the hunter. The injured man is resting quietly. The small clan is settled for the night. This shallow overhang, little more than a scoop in the rock face, is not their permanent residence, but for tonight, it is home. You take a moment to absorb the details of this Paleolithic domestic scene, a life lived in the twilight of caves and rock shelters. The choice of a dwelling was not a casual one. A good cave or rock shelter was prime Paleolithic estate. The perfect home base offered a number of advantages: a ceiling that kept the rain and snow out, a defensible position with a good view of the surrounding landscape to spot approaching game or threats, and proximity to fresh water and other resources like wood and flint. The mainstream historical fact is that Neanderthals were masters of their local geography, with favoured sites being occupied intermittently for thousands, even tens of thousands of years. Sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq or El Castillo in Spain were not just temporary camps. They were ancestral homes, places imbued with generations of memory. As you look around this small shelter, you notice the thoughtful use of space. The fire is not just plopped in the middle. It's set a specific distance from the rock wall, close enough for the stone to absorb and radiate heat back into the living area, creating a cosy microclimate. But it's not so close that the smoke, which is the real killer, chokes them out. Managing fire in an enclosed space is a tricky business. The romance of a crackling cave fire quickly gives way to the reality of stinging eyes and lungs full of toxic soot. Archaeologists believe that the position of hearths within caves was a deliberate choice to take advantage of natural ventilation and airflow patterns. The space within the shelter is organised. The area closest to the fire is the centre of activity: cooking, tool-making, socialising. The floor here is likely a compacted mix of ash, dirt, and discarded bone fragments from countless meals. Deeper in the shelter, in the darker, more protected areas, are the sleeping zones. You can see the beds of moss, grass and ferns, a conscious effort to create a soft insulated barrier against the cold stone floor. This spatial organisation, this division of a living area into zones for different activities, is a hallmark of human behaviour. It's the ancient equivalent of having a kitchen, a workshop and a bedroom. And here's a quirky detail that modern archaeology has revealed. Their housekeeping was, well, let's call it structured. While the main living areas were kept relatively clean, they seem to have had designated toss zones. At the edges of the shelter or just outside the entrance, you would find piles of discarded animal bones, broken tools and other debris. It wasn't just a random mess, it was a system. They were actively maintaining their living space, keeping the central areas clear and tossing the trash in specific spots. It's the Ice Age version of taking out the garbage, though their curb was just a few feet away. Of course, home life wasn't always cosy. Scholars still debate the extent to which Neanderthals modified their living spaces. Did they erect simple windbreaks of animal hide at the mouth of the cave to keep out the drafts? Did they build internal structures or partitions? The evidence is tantalising but often ambiguous. A series of post holes could be from a hide drying rack or the foundation of a simple hut built within the cave. The famous Brunicle Circle, a structure made of broken stalagmites deep within a French cave, proves they could and did build things, but its purpose, ritual or domestic, remains a profound mystery. Life in the cave also came with uninvited roommates. Cave bears, hyenas and lions all saw a nice dry cave as prime real estate. The competition for these shelters would have been fierce. A clan might have to systematically drive out a den of hyenas or a hibernating bear to claim a cave, a risky and terrifying undertaking. And even after they moved in, the scent of their food and fire would attract scavengers and predators. A night in the cave was not a time of perfect security, but one of vigilant awareness, with someone likely always on watch, keeping the fire stoked as a barrier against the things that crept in the darkness. The hunter you've been watching stirs, adding a few pieces of dry wood to the embers. The fire flares up, casting long, dancing shadows on the cave wall. He's tending the flame, the heart of his home. Fire was everything. It was warmth against the killing cold. It was light against the primordial dark. It was a tool for cooking food, making it safer and more nutritious. It was a weapon that kept predators at bay. And it was a social hearth, the focal point around which the clan gathered to share food, mend tools, and reinforce the social bonds that held their world together. This small, smoky shelter is a microcosm of Neanderthal life. It's a place of surprising domesticity and organisation, a fortress against a hostile world, and a hub of social connection. It's messy, smelly, and probably quite crowded, but it's a sanctuary. As you watch the flames dance, you realise that the concept of home is one of the most ancient human inventions. It's more than just a roof over your head. It's the place you feel safe, the place you belong. And for this small clan, in this particular scoop of rock, on this particular frozen night, this is it. The hunter stares into the glowing embers, his face illuminated by the soft, warm light. The rest of the clan is asleep or resting, and a profound quiet has settled over the shelter. In this moment of stillness, you can't help but wonder what's going on inside his head. What does a Neanderthal think about? Is he reliving the hunt? Is he planning for tomorrow? Is he simply enjoying the warmth? To even begin to answer that, you have to look inside his skull, at the engine of his consciousness, his brain. The first and most startling fact about the Neanderthal brain is its size. For a long time, we've been conditioned to equate brain size with intelligence, and to see ourselves as the pinnacle of cerebral development. But the truth is, the average Neanderthal brain was significantly larger than the average modern human brain. We average around 1,400 cubic centimetres. Neanderthals clocked in at around 1,600 cubic centimetres, with some specimens reaching 1,700 or more. It's a humbling piece of data. If you were to meet him on the street, he would literally be the bigger brain in the conversation. It's a classic case where size doesn't matter as much as the layout. And the layout was different. A modern human brain is globular, shaped more or less like a soccer ball, with a high domed skull. A Neanderthal brain, housed in its long, low skull, was shaped more like a football. It was elongated, lower and wider. This difference in shape wasn't just cosmetic. It reflects a different arrangement and proportion of the brain's various lobes. This is the heart of what made their intelligence a different kind of smart. Let's break it down. Their brains had a very large occipital lobe, the region in the back of the head that processes visual information. This makes perfect sense when you remember those huge eye sockets and massive eyeballs we talked about. A huge portion of their mental real estate was dedicated to sight, giving them a high-definition, low-light visual perception of the world that we can only dream of. Furthermore, their parietal lobes, which are crucial for spatial awareness, sensory integration and tool use, were incredibly robust. Their intelligence was likely deeply visceral, immediate, and embodied. Think of it as having the world's best graphics card for processing the real world in real time. He wouldn't need to abstractly think about how to throw a spear. His brain was a master at calculating the physics of the throw, the arc, the impact, all in an intuitive, seamless flash of sensory and motor processing. His mental map of his territory wasn't a set of directions. It was a rich, three-dimensional sensory landscape stored in his head. His intelligence was grounded in the doing, the seeing, and the feeling of the world around him. Our brains, by contrast, took a different evolutionary path. Our globular shape is partly due to an expanded cerebellum and larger frontal lobes. While the cerebellum is famously associated with motor control, it's also deeply involved in processing language, social cues, and learning. Complex sequences. Our frontal lobes are the seat of a long-term planning, abstract symbolism, and, perhaps most critically, managing larger and more complex social networks. While the Neanderthal was running a supercomputer for visual and spatial processing, Homo sapiens was busy upgrading its social networking software. Scientists still argue about what these differences in brain shape truly meant for their day-to-day cognition. Was it just a different flavour of human intelligence, or was their entire conscious experience fundamentally different from our own? Did they dream in more vivid detail? Was their memory for places and images nearly photographic? We can only speculate. This cognitive difference might also provide a quirky explanation for one of the great puzzles of the Neanderthal world: the remarkable stability of their technology. Remember the Mustierian toolkit? It was a brilliant, effective technology that remained largely unchanged for over 200,000 years. The old interpretation was that this showed a lack of innovation, a sign of being stuck in their ways. But perhaps we're looking at it through the wrong lens. Maybe their cognitive style wasn't geared towards constant radical change, but towards the masterful perfection and refinement of a system that worked. Theirs was an intelligence of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. There was less disruptive innovation, and more, if this spear point keeps working, don't get gored by a rhino while you try to invent a new one. It's a pragmatic, conservative genius that is, in its own way, profoundly intelligent. So as he sits there, staring into the fire, he's probably not pondering the abstract nature of existence, or composing a sonnet about the beauty of the embers. His thoughts are likely more concrete, more tangible. He might be replaying the bison's charge in perfect visual detail, analysing its movements. He might be feeling the phantom weight and balance of his spear in his hand, a form of mental practice. He's thinking with his whole body, his whole sensory system. His consciousness is a river of rich, immediate experience, not a series of abstract propositions. He is not dumber than you. He is smart in a way you can no longer be. He is a master of the physical world, a genius of the here and now. The hunter lets out a soft grunt, a sound of contentment as he shifts his position by the fire. The sleeping child beside him murmurs in his sleep. In the stillness of the shelter, these small vocalizations seem amplified, and they lead you to one of the most profound and fiercely debated questions in all of human origins. Could they speak? Did they have language? For more than a century, the answer was presumed to be a firm no. The Neanderthal was the silent, grunting brute of our imagination, but the evidence, both anatomical and genetic, has slowly painted a much more complicated and intriguing picture. The first major clue came not from a brain case, but from a single tiny bone. In 1989, at a site in Israel called Cooperative, archaeologists found a Neanderthal skeleton that included a perfectly preserved hyoid bone. This is a small U-shaped bone that sits in the throat, and it's unique in that it doesn't articulate with any other bone. Instead, it's held in place by muscles and ligaments, and it acts as the anchor for the tongue and the larynx. In short, it's a crucial piece of the anatomical machinery that allows us to speak. The mainstream historical fact is that the Kabara hyoid bone was, for all intents and purposes, identical to a modern human's. This discovery sent shockwaves through the paleoanthropological community. Anatomically, at least, it seemed they possessed the necessary hardware for speech. Of course, having the right equipment doesn't mean you know how to use it. You can have a larynx, but if your vocal tract, tongue and lips aren't configured correctly, the range of sounds you can produce might be very limited. This is where the debate gets heated. Early attempts to reconstruct the Neanderthal vocal tract based on the shape of their skulls suggested they couldn't produce the full range of vowels that we can, particularly the E, R, and OO sounds that are fundamental to all modern languages. The theory was their speech would have been slower, more nasal, and less distinct than ours. Imagine a language with fewer, more ambiguous sounds. However, more recent and sophisticated biomechanical models have challenged this. By creating virtual models of their vocal anatomy and airflow, some researchers now argue that their sound production capabilities were much greater than previously thought, perhaps even on par with our own. So, the question remains a subject of intense scholarly argument. Were they anatomically capable of the full range of human speech, or was their phonetic toolkit more limited? We can't know for sure without a time machine and a very good microphone, but the evidence for language isn't just in the bones, it's also in the genes. The search for a language gene led scientists to a specific gene called FOXP2. This gene doesn't control language directly, but it plays a crucial role in the development of the fine motor control in the face and larynx needed for speech production. Humans with a mutated version of the FOXP2 gene have severe speech and language disorders. When scientists were finally able to sequence ancient Neanderthal DNA, they made a stunning discovery. Neanderthals had the exact same version of the FOXP2 gene as we do. The genetic prerequisite for the fine muscular control of speech was in place, so they had the hyoid bone, they had the gene, and their brains were certainly large enough to handle the processing demands of language. But here's the quirky and perhaps most compelling argument for Neanderthal language. You simply can't do what they did without it. How do you teach a child the multi-step, abstract process of making a Levallois tool without using words? How do you coordinate a group hunt of a giant bison with some members driving the animal and others waiting in ambush, using only hand gestures and grunts? How do you pass down the knowledge of which mushrooms are safe to eat, which plants have medicinal properties, or how to manufacture birch bark tar, a complex chemical process, without a sophisticated communication system? It stretches the bounds of credulity to think these complex cooperative behaviours could exist in the absence of a true language. Their language probably wasn't identical to ours. Given the different shape of their brains, with less emphasis on the areas we use for complex social networking, it might have been structured differently. Perhaps it was less focused on abstract concepts and more on the concrete, the here and now. A language rich in words for different types of snow, the direction of the wind, the emotional state of a bison, but perhaps with fewer words for yesterday or tomorrow. Maybe it was a language of doing rather than a language of being. The hunter lets out another soft sound, a sigh this time. You can imagine him, earlier in the day, discussing the hunt with his comrades. Not in grunts, but in a true language, a voice that has been silent for 40,000 years. What did it sound like? Based on their large chests and nasal cavities, some researchers have speculated their voices would have been higher pitched than our own, but also more nasal and incredibly powerful. A loud, piercing and resonant voice, perfectly suited for carrying across the vast, open landscapes of the Ice Age. The evidence, when taken all together, points overwhelmingly in one direction. They spoke. They had a language as complex and as nuanced as their lives demanded. We may never know its vocabulary or its grammar, but to deny them language is to deny them the very essence of their sophisticated, cooperative culture. The silence of the cave is not the silence of a mindless brute. It is the respectful silence of a family, a group of people who have already said all that needs to be said for the day, now resting in the shared understanding that only a common language can bring. The firelight flickers, and for a moment, it catches something unexpected. On the rock wall behind the hunter, a smear of dark red pigment stands out against the pale limestone. It's not a painting, not a recognisable shape like the famous horses and bison of Lascaux. It's just a patch of colour, a deliberate mark made on the wall. Your eyes are drawn to it, and then to the hunter himself. Around his neck, Hanging from a leather cord is not a tooth or a shell, but the talon of a massive eagle, its surface polished smooth by wear. These are not tools for survival. They are something else. They are whispers of a rich symbolic inner world. For a very long time, the capacity for art and symbolism was considered the exclusive domain of Homo sapiens. It was seen as the definitive cognitive leap, the thing that made us truly human. Neanderthals, in this narrative, were the ultimate pragmatists, their minds occupied only with flint, food, and fire. But just as with diet and language, this old story has begun to crumble under the weight of new evidence. The mainstream historical fact now is that Neanderthals did engage in symbolic behaviour, and they had a sense of aesthetics. Their world was not just shades of brown and grey, it was decorated. The evidence is scattered and subtle, but it is compelling. All across Europe at Neanderthal sites, archaeologists have found pigments, lumps of black manganese dioxide and red or yellow ochre. These weren't just random rocks. They were often sourced from miles away, carefully selected, and show clear signs of being scraped and ground to produce powders. What were they doing with these pigments? The smear on the cave wall is one possibility. At sites in Spain, like La Pasiega and Maltravieso, there are simple geometric shapes, ladders, lines, and hand stencils that have been dated to over 65,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens arrived in the region. These are currently the oldest known cave paintings in the world, and their artists were Neanderthals. But their canvas wasn't just cave walls, it was likely their own bodies. They may have used these pigments to paint their skin, for camouflage, for ritual, or simply for personal adornment. Imagine this hunter, before the bison hunt, marking his face with streaks of red ochre, a silent signal of his intent and his group identity. It's a form of expression as old as humanity itself. And then there's the jewellery. The eagle talon you see around his neck is not a fictional embellishment. At a site in Krapina, Croatia, a set of 8 white-tailed eagle talons were found, all showing signs of being cut, polished and strung together to be worn as a necklace or a bracelet. This wasn't a quick and easy thing to make. You have to catch a white-tailed eagle, one of the most powerful birds of prey in the sky, a feat of incredible skill and daring. Then you have to carefully butcher it, not for food, but for these specific non-functional bones. This is an act loaded with symbolic meaning. Did the wearer believe they were gaining the eagle's strength, its keen eyesight? We can never know for sure, but it is undeniably an object of beauty and power. Scholars still debate the depth and complexity of Neanderthal symbolism. Was it a full-blown system of mythology and ritual, or was it a more personal, aesthetic sense of adornment? The evidence is not as prolific or as spectacular as the art of the Upper Paleolithic Homo sapiens who came later. You don't find vast galleries of painted mammoths or intricate carved figurines. Neanderthal art, as we currently understand it, was more minimalist, more abstract and perhaps more personal, and it came in quirky, unexpected forms. At a site in Italy, a fossilised marine shell was found that had been collected by Neanderthals, smeared with red ochre and brought 40 kilometres inland. It had no practical use. It was simply a beautiful object, a curiosity worth collecting and keeping. They also seemed to have a fascination with feathers. Cut marks on the wing bones of birds of prey, particularly birds with large, dark, impressive feathers like eagles and vultures, suggest they were systematically harvesting them. Not for fletching spears, the marks are in the wrong places, but for the feathers themselves. Were they wearing them in their hair, attaching them to their clothes, using them in some form of ritual? It's a tantalising glimpse of a lost aesthetic. Perhaps the most enigmatic evidence of their symbolic world is the Bruniquel Circle, which you were thinking about earlier. Deep inside a cave in France, more than 300 metres from the entrance, someone broke off over 400 stalagmites and arranged them into 2 large rings and several smaller stacks. It's a massive undertaking, and it was dated to 176,000 years ago. It was built by Neanderthals in the deep, silent, absolute darkness. It wasn't a home, it wasn't a workshop. It was something else. Was it a ritual space? A shrine? A place for storytelling? We have no idea. It is a profound and beautiful mystery, a piece of architecture from a lost world of thought. The hunter shifts slightly, and the eagle talon glints in the firelight. The red smear on the wall seems to pulse in the gloom. These small traces are windows into his mind, into his culture. They show us that his world was not devoid of beauty, of meaning beyond the purely practical. He had a sense of style. He appreciated colour. He saw power and meaning in the natural world around him. He was not just a survivor, he was a person, with an inner life as rich and as complex as the forest outside. His mind was not just a tool for hunting, but a canvas for the imagination. A sudden gust of wind funnels into the rock shelter, making the embers flare and sending a swirl of ash into the air. The hunter sits up, instantly alert. The sleeping child presses closer to him. The hunter's head is cocked, his superhuman senses on high alert. It's not the sound of a predator he's detected, not the familiar tread of a bear or the cry of a lion. It's something else. A scent on the wind that is subtly wrong. The distant, flickering light of a fire where no fire should be. The faint, rhythmic sound of a voice that is not the voice of his people. He gets up, silent as a shadow, and creeps to the edge of the shelter, peering out into the moonlit darkness. Out on the edge of the valley, a small pinprick of orange light flickers against the vast, dark tapestry of the forest. It's another campfire, but he knows every clan, every family group in this territory. This is not one of them. He watches, his powerful eyes easily picking out the figures moving around the fire. They are tall, taller than his people, and startlingly thin. Their limbs are long and lanky, their movements quick and strangely gracile. They look fragile, ill-suited to the cold, yet here they are. You're witnessing a moment that would change the course of human history forever. The newcomers have arrived. Homo sapiens. These are your direct ancestors, a new wave of humanity spreading out of Africa and into the wider world. They have been trickling into Europe for some time, but now they are here, in his valley, in his territory. The mainstream historical fact is that this period of contact and coexistence between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens began around 45,000 years ago and lasted for several thousand years. A slow, drawn-out overlap that varied from region to region. This wasn't a sudden, violent invasion. It was a gradual encroachment, a slow dance of two different kinds of human sharing a single, challenging landscape. The Neanderthal hunter watches them from the darkness, a ghost in his own land. He's assessing them with the same intense analytical gaze he turned on you. He notes their strange, flimsy-looking clothing, made not of heavy hides, but perhaps of lighter, more tailored skins. He sees their weapons. They carry spears, yes, but they look different, slimmer, lighter, and some of them are holding a new bizarre device. It's a spear thrower, an atlatl, a carved piece of wood, or antler, that acts as a lever, allowing them to launch their light darts with incredible speed, and from a much greater distance than he can manage with his heavy, multi-purpose spear. It's a technological leap that changes the entire calculus of hunting. Their fire is different too. It's smaller, more controlled, perhaps built in a more efficient way that conserves fuel. Everything about them seems geared towards efficiency, lightness, and distance. They are a people built for endurance, not for power. Their bodies, with those long limbs and linear frames, are perfectly adapted for covering vast distances, following migratory herds across the open steppe. They are the marathon runners to his power lifter. The great scholarly debate has always been about the nature of this first contact. Was it a violent clash of competing species? Did they see each other as rivals, as enemies to be driven off or eliminated? Or was it a more peaceful, curious encounter? Did they trade, share knowledge, or simply avoid each other, like two different species of predator sharing the same forest, but hunting at different times of day? The answer is likely all of the above. There were probably moments of violent conflict, moments of cautious cooperation, and long periods of mutual indifference. From his vantage point, the Neanderthal can hear them. Their voices are different, a higher, more melodic cadence. They are laughing. It's a sound of easy social interaction, a group of people reinforcing their bonds through shared humour. It's a slightly alien sound to his ears, perhaps. His own clan's interactions are more staid, more focused. This casual, noisy sociability seems strange, almost frivolous. And here's a quirky thought. What was the very first interaction like? Imagine a Neanderthal and a Homo sapiens stumbling upon each other at a stream, both there to drink. The moment of stunned silence, the cautious assessment. The Neanderthal, broad and powerful, a being of pure physical presence. The sapiens, slighter, more gracile, his eyes wide with a different kind of calculating intelligence. Do they fight? Do they flee? Or do they simply nod, acknowledging a fellow human in this vast, dangerous world, and then go their separate ways? We will never know, but it is one of history's most tantalizingly silent encounters. The hunter pulls back from the edge of the shelter, melting into the shadows. He's not afraid, but he is concerned. He is a master of this world, this cold, hard, beautiful world. He knows every rock, every tree, every animal track. This is his home. But these newcomers, they are a new variable in the ancient equation of survival. They are different. They hunt differently. They move differently. They sound different. They are hunters of the same game, seekers of the same shelters. They are competition. He returns to the fireside, his face a mask of stone in the dim light. He is thinking, processing this new information with his large, differently wired brain. The world, which had been so predictable for so long, has suddenly become a more complicated place. The long solitary reign of the Neanderthals in Europe is ending. A new chapter is beginning, a chapter in which they will no longer be the only humans in the story. And as he sits there, a silent, powerful sentinel in the night, you can feel the subtle shift in the tectonic plates of history. The future has arrived, and it is tall and thin, and it carries a new kind of weapon. The Neanderthal hunter remains awake by the embers, his mind processing the arrival of the newcomers. From his shadowy perch he had watched them, and in that moment 2 distinct strategies for surviving the Ice Age were thrown into sharp relief. This wasn't a simple case of a superior people meeting an inferior one. It was a meeting of 2 different but equally brilliant solutions to the same problem: how to be human in a world of ice and monsters. You're now a privileged observer of this tale of 2 humans. Let's start with the fundamentals, their bodies. You've already admired the Neanderthal's physique, the short, stocky, incredibly powerful build of a cold weather specialist. He is a masterpiece of heat conservation and explosive force. Now, contrast that with the Homo sapiens he saw across the valley. Theirs is a tropical body plan, one that evolved in the heat of Africa and was only recently introduced to the cold of Europe. Their long limbs and slender build, governed by Allen's and Bergman's rules, are designed to dissipate heat, not conserve it. On the surface, this seems like a massive disadvantage in the Ice Age. They must have been perpetually, miserably cold. But this fragile-looking body had a hidden advantage. It was incredibly energy efficient. A lanky, Homo sapiens body requires significantly fewer calories per day to run than a dense, muscular Neanderthal body. While our Neanderthal friend needs 4,000 to 5,000 calories just to break even, his new sapiens neighbour might have gotten by on 3,000. This lower energy budget gave them a wider margin for error. A failed hunt was less catastrophic. They could survive on smaller, more frequent meals. They were the fuel-efficient sedans to the Neanderthal's gas-guzzling truck. This physical difference was reflected in their toolkits and hunting strategies. The Neanderthal, as you've seen, was a master of the Mustierian tradition and the Levallois technique. His tools were versatile, robust, and perfect for his close-quarters hunting style. He carried a Swiss army knife. The newcomers, however, brought with them a new way of thinking about stone. This is the mainstream historical fact of the transition, the arrival of the Upper Paleolithic technologies. The sapiens specialized in producing long, thin, standardized blades from a core, a technique that was incredibly efficient in terms of how many usable cutting edges you could get from a single piece of high-quality flint. From these blades, they could create a huge variety of specialized tools: fine needles for sewing, barbed points for harpoons, sharp burins for carving bone and antler. Their toolkit was less of a Swiss army knife and more of a full surgeon's kit, with a specific tool for every conceivable task. This technological difference culminated in their hunting weapons. The Neanderthal had his heavy, versatile spear, a devastating weapon in a close-up brawl. The sapiens, with their spear throwers or atlatls, chose a different path. The atlatl is a force multiplier. It turns the arm into a compound lever, allowing a light spear or dart to be thrown with incredible velocity and accuracy over a much greater distance. They traded brute force for ranged lethality. They could hunt the same dangerous animals as the Neanderthals but from a safer distance, reducing the risk of those bone-shattering rodeo rider injuries. Socially, the 2 groups were also organized differently. Neanderthals lived in small, tight-knit family groups or clans. Their world was local. They knew their territory with an incredible intimacy, but their social networks were likely limited. The newcomers, on the other hand, seem to have operated in larger, more interconnected bands. Archaeological evidence suggests they had long-distance trade networks. A seashell from the Mediterranean might be found at a sapien site hundreds of miles inland in Germany. This implies not just travel, but a wide-reaching social web. These networks were a form of social insurance. If one group was having a hard time, they could call on distant relatives or allies for help. The Neanderthals had their immediate family, the sapiens had a whole phone book of friends. This leads to a quirky but potentially profound difference: the presence of dogs. The oldest evidence for the domestication of dogs appears around this time, and it's associated with Homo sapiens. While there's no definitive proof that the first sapiens to enter Europe had dogs, it's a tantalising possibility. A hunting partner that could track prey, corner it, and warn of predators would have been a game-changing advantage. Did Neanderthals ever look across a valley and see a sapiens hunter working with a wolf-like creature and wonder what on earth was going on? The debate among scholars rages on. What was the key difference that allowed one group to ultimately thrive while the other faded away? Was it the projectile weapons, the more efficient bodies, the larger social networks, the tailored clothing made possible by bone needles? Or was it simply a matter of demographics? The slow, steady trickle of sapiens newcomers eventually just overwhelming the smaller, more sparsely populated Neanderthal clans through sheer numbers? There is no single, easy answer. It was likely a complex mosaic of all these factors, playing out differently in different regions over thousands of years. The Neanderthal hunter sits by the fire, a living embodiment of one strategy. His is a strategy of power, resilience, and masterful adaptation to a specific environment. He is a specialist of the cold, a king in his own valley. The strategy of the newcomers is one of flexibility, efficiency, and social connection. They are generalists, equipped to adapt to a wider range of environments. For several thousand years, these two strategies coexisted on the same continent. It was a world with more than one way to be human. But as the night deepens, a sense of melancholy hangs in the air. You're watching the twilight of one world and the dawn of another. Weeks, months, or perhaps even years have passed since the night the hunter first saw the flickering fires of the newcomers. The initial wariness has settled into a complex, unwritten treaty of coexistence. The two groups still largely keep to themselves, their hunting grounds overlapping at the edges, their paths crossing occasionally at a river bend or a game trail. The encounters are brief, tense, a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. But something else is happening, something secret and profound, happening not in the open but in the liminal spaces between the two worlds. Imagine a young Neanderthal woman. She is strong, capable, a vital member of her clan. Perhaps she is out gathering herbs near the edge of her clan's territory. She's focused on her task, her powerful eyes scanning the undergrowth for the telltale leaves of a medicinal plant. She hears a sound and looks up to see a young Homo sapiens hunter. He's on his own, perhaps tracking a deer that has led him astray from his own people. He is as startled as she is. They stand there, separated by 20 yards of forest floor and 500,000 years of separate evolutionary history. He sees her raw, compact power. She sees his strange, graceful height. They are the living embodiment of the two human forms you've been contemplating. But they are also just a young man and a young woman. The universal biological imperatives that have driven life for millennia are still present, humming beneath the surface of their cultural differences. Is it fear they feel, or is it fascination? This is where the story moves from the bones and stones into the very code of life itself. For a long time, the question of whether Neanderthals and Homo sapiens could, and did, interbreed was a subject of fierce debate. Based on skeletal anatomy, many scientists thought it was impossible that the two groups were distinct, reproductively isolated species. But in 2010, the first draft of the Neanderthal genome was published, a monumental achievement of science. And when they compared it to the genomes of modern humans, they found the bombshell. The mainstream historical fact is that if you are of non-African descent, somewhere between 1% and 4% of your DNA is of Neanderthal origin. The encounter between the Neanderthal woman and the sapiens man was not a one-off event. It happened. Not often, perhaps, but enough to leave a permanent indelible mark on the genetic heritage of our species. We carry a ghost in our genome. The implications are staggering. It means that at some point a Neanderthal and a sapiens looked at each other and did not see an alien, an enemy, or a competitor. They saw a potential partner. It means they were not separate species at all, but two subspecies of a single, diverse human family, capable of producing fertile offspring. The very definition of what it means to be a species is challenged by this fact. So how did it happen? Scholars still argue about the social dynamics of these encounters. Was it a result of violent conflict, with one group stealing mates from the other, or was it a more peaceful, consensual exchange? Perhaps an individual got lost from their group and was adopted into another. Or maybe, just maybe, it was simply love, or at least attraction, blooming in the strange shared world of the Ice Age. It's a bit of a quirky romantic notion, a Paleolithic love story, but it's not impossible. The human heart is a strange and unpredictable thing. Imagine the child born of such a union. What would they have looked like? A blend of the two forms? Would they have the stocky build of their mother's people, but the lanky limbs of their father's? Would they have the prominent brow ridge, but a more defined chin? They would have been a living bridge between the two worlds. And what of their life? Would they be accepted? Would they feel like they belonged in either group, or would they be an outsider in both? The genetic evidence suggests that these pairings may have faced some biological hurdles. Certain parts of our genome, like the X chromosome, are notably deserts of Neanderthal DNA, suggesting that some hybrid offspring, particularly males, may have been infertile. This is a common phenomenon in genetics when two closely related but distinct populations interbreed. It means that while they could have children, it wasn't always a smooth biological process. The hunter you have been following, the pure-blooded Neanderthal, might have looked at such a hybrid child with confusion, even suspicion. He would see a familiar face, but also the face of the newcomers, a constant reminder of the changing world. Yet, the fact that this DNA was passed down means that these children were not all outcasts. They were raised, they survived, and they had children of their own, successfully integrating their mixed heritage into the burgeoning Homo sapiens gene pool. This genetic legacy is not just a historical curiosity. The Neanderthal DNA we carry is not random junk. It's concentrated in specific areas of our genome, and it has real, tangible effects on our biology today. But for now, just absorb the human reality of it. The great story of human evolution is not a simple, linear march of one species replacing another. It's a messy, complicated, and far more interesting story of contact, competition, and, yes, intimacy. The tale of two humans is not just a tale of two separate groups. It's a tale that, for a brief, fascinating chapter, became a tale of one. And you, listening to this story thousands of years later, are a living testament to that unlikely love affair. The seasons turn. The brief, frantic summers give way to the long, brutal winters, year after year. The coexistence between the Neanderthals and the lanky newcomers becomes the new normal. But a subtle, ominous change is taking place. A change so gradual that the hunter and his clan might not even notice it on a day-to-day basis. Their world is shrinking. The campfires of the sapiens are becoming more numerous, their presence more established. The herds of bison and reindeer seem a little harder to find this year. The ancestral cave they plan to winter in is already occupied by a band of newcomers. The long goodbye of the Neanderthals has begun. This wasn't a sudden event, not a single cataclysmic extinction. It was a slow, agonizing fade over thousands of years, a demographic decline that played out across the vast expanse of Eurasia. The mainstream historical fact is that by around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals had disappeared from the archaeological record, leaving the entire continent, and eventually the entire world, to Homo sapiens. The question that has haunted paleoanthropologists for over a century is simple. Why? What pushed them over the edge? There is no single, easy answer. Instead, scientists point to a perfect storm of converging factors, a multi-pronged assault on their way of life. The first and perhaps most fundamental pressure was climate. The Ice Age was not a stable period of cold. It was punctuated by dramatic, rapid climate swings. Around the time the Neanderthals were in decline, the climate became extremely volatile, with sudden cold snaps, called Heinrich events, and Dansgaard-Oeschger events causing massive, rapid shifts in temperature and vegetation. The familiar mammoth steppe could transform into a different kind of ecosystem in just a few generations. The Neanderthals, as specialists of a particular kind of cold environment, may have struggled to adapt to this new instability. Their entire way of life was tuned to a predictable rhythm of seasons and animal migrations. When that rhythm was disrupted, their specialized hunting strategies may have become less effective. The sapiens, as adaptable generalists with their more varied diet and long-distance social networks, were perhaps better equipped to roll with the punches, to move or adapt when their local environment changed. This leads to the second major factor: competition. The Neanderthals were no longer the only apex predator on the block. They were now in direct competition with Homo sapiens for the same resources, the same animals, the same caves, the same high-quality flint, and the sapiens, with their lower caloric needs, more efficient blade technology and projectile weapons, may have simply been a more efficient competitor. Think of it like two companies competing for the same market. The Neanderthals were the old established company with a reliable but heavy and expensive product. The sapiens were the nimble startup with a cheaper, more adaptable product and a better distribution network. In the long run, the economic fundamentals were on their side. A key scholarly debate revolves around the concept of demographic pressure. Neanderthals lived in small, sparsely populated groups. Their overall population was never very large, perhaps only in the tens of thousands across all of Europe. The sapiens coming out of Africa likely arrived in greater numbers, with a slightly higher birth rate and a more robust system of social support that might have improved infant survival. Even a tiny 1% demographic advantage compounded over 1,000 years is enough to completely replace a population. The Neanderthals didn't necessarily die out in a wave of violence. They may have simply been outbred, their small campfires slowly swamped by the rising tide of sapiens. And here's a quirky but potentially devastating possibility. We may have brought diseases with us. When a new population moves into a territory, it often brings with it pathogens for which the native population has no immunity. The sapiens, coming from the tropical and subtropical environments of Africa, may have carried diseases that were mild to them but devastating to the Neanderthals, whose immune systems had been isolated in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. It's possible that a wave of crowd diseases, things we are now familiar with, swept through the Neanderthal population, weakening them and making them even more vulnerable to the other pressures they faced. It's a tragic, ironic thought. Their long goodbye may have been accelerated by the ancient equivalent of the common cold. The hunter you've followed feels this pressure in a tangible way. The hunts are longer, the rewards slimmer. He sees the sapiens more often, their lean figures flitting through the woods that were once his alone. He sees their success, their growing numbers. There's no single moment of defeat, just a slow, grinding erosion of his world. He leads his family from one valley to the next, searching for a place that feels like home, a place that is not already claimed. Their final strongholds were in places like the Iberian Peninsula, pushed to the very southwestern corner of Europe, a final refuge against the changing world. The reasons for their disappearance are a complex, interwoven tapestry of climate change, resource competition, demographic pressure, and possibly disease. It wasn't one thing, but everything at once. They were a successful, intelligent, and resilient people who thrived for hundreds of thousands of years. But in the end, they were caught in a perfect storm they could not weather. As you watch the hunter and his dwindling clan move through the twilight of their existence, you are witnessing the end of an era, the quiet, heartbreaking conclusion to a human story that had lasted for millennia. The Neanderthal hunter and his small clan are on the move again. They are thinner now, the confident resilience in their eyes replaced by a weary, haunted watchfulness. They are refugees in their own homeland. They top a ridge and look down into a valley that should be empty, a valley that has been part of their seasonal round for generations. But it is not empty. A large band of Homo sapiens is camped by the river, their fires numerous, their children's cries echoing in the crisp air. The sapiens hunters, armed with their atlatls, are dragging a pair of reindeer back to their camp. They have taken the prime spot, the best hunting grounds. The Neanderthal clan has a choice: turn back and try another valley, or go down and confront them. This brings us to the most uncomfortable and emotionally charged question surrounding the Neanderthals' disappearance. Did we kill them? Was their extinction a passive process of being outcompeted, or was it an active process of violence and displacement? Was this a gentle replacement, or was it the first and most successful genocide in human history? It's a question that forces us to look in the mirror and confront the darker aspects of our own species' nature. The evidence for direct, widespread warfare between the two groups is, frankly, scarce. There is no archaeological equivalent of a Paleolithic battlefield littered with the bodies of Neanderthals killed by sapiens weapons. The violent conquest model, which was popular for a time, has largely fallen out of favour due to this lack of hard evidence. The mainstream historical view today leans more towards the complex model of climate change and indirect competition we just discussed. However, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Conflict in the Paleolithic would have been small-scale, episodic, and personal. It wouldn't have been organised armies clashing. It would have been a skirmish between two hunting parties that met at a kill, a raid on a camp to steal food or resources, a violent dispute over a particularly valuable cave. These small, brutal encounters would leave very little archaeological trace. A Neanderthal skeleton with a spear point lodged in its ribs could be evidence of intergroup violence, but it could just as easily be evidence of a hunting accident or conflict within his own group. Yet, we cannot ignore the fundamental nature of humanity. Homo sapiens, throughout recorded history, have shown a remarkable capacity for territoriality, tribalism, and violence against those they perceive as other. It seems naively optimistic to assume that our ancestors, upon meeting a different kind of human competing for the same limited resources, would have been universally peaceful and accommodating. The capacity for violence is as much a part of our toolkit as our ability to cooperate. The debate among scholars on this point is often passionate. Some argue that attributing a genocidal nature to our ancestors is an anachronistic projection of modern guilt onto the past. They maintain that the primary drivers were environmental and demographic, not violent. Others argue that to ignore the potential for violence is to sanitize the past, to absolve our species of its role in the extinction of our closest relatives. They point out that even low-level endemic conflict, a constant pressure of raids and skirmishes at the frontiers of their territories, could have been a decisive factor, tipping the already stressed Neanderthal population into an unrecoverable decline. And here's a quirky but chilling thought that bridges the gap between competition and violence. Some researchers have proposed a theory of lethal competition. The idea is that Homo sapiens didn't set out to exterminate the Neanderthals in a grand campaign. Instead, they simply applied the same ruthless hunting strategies they used on mammoths and bison to their human competitors. If a small clan of Neanderthals was occupying a cave you wanted, you might not try to negotiate. You might just treat them as you would any other large, dangerous animal that needed to be cleared out of the way. It's a horrifyingly pragmatic view of our ancestors, but one that's difficult to entirely dismiss. The Neanderthal hunter on the ridge looks down at the sapiens camp. He has a choice. He could lead his family down there, try to fight for what was once his, but he is outnumbered. They have those strange, deadly throwing weapons. A direct confrontation would be suicide. The risk is too great. The most intelligent, the most adaptive response is to avoid conflict, to swallow the loss, and to move on in search of scarcer and scarcer resources. This might be the most likely scenario of all. The Neanderthal extinction may not have been a loud, bloody war, but a long, slow retreat. A death by 1,000 cuts, a series of lost territories and lost resources. We may not have marched across Europe with the express purpose of killing them, but we backed them into a corner from which there was no escape. We were the rising tide, and they were the sandcastle, built strong and proud, but ultimately unable to withstand the inexorable pressure of the waves. Our success was, by definition, their failure. Our expansion was their contraction. He turns his back on the valley, his shoulders slumped. He leads his family away from the sounds of the newcomers, deeper into the marginal lands, further into the twilight. The question of our complicity hangs in the air. We may not have been the executioner that held the axe, but we were the ones who built the gallows, who kicked away the stool, who benefited from their fall. It is a heavy and perhaps inescapable part of our human inheritance. The Neanderthal hunter and his clan have vanished. The valleys that once echoed with their powerful voices are now silent, or rather, they are filled with the new sounds of the sapiens. The last Neanderthal campfire has flickered and died out somewhere in the rocky refuges of Gibraltar, some 40,000 years ago. Their story, it seems, is over. They are a ghost, a fossil, a fascinating but closed chapter in the book of human evolution. But you, sitting here, listening to this, are living proof that this is not entirely true. They are not entirely gone. You just have to know where to look. The ghost is in your genome. As you learned earlier, the fact that modern non-African humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA is now an established scientific reality. But this discovery was just the beginning. In the years since the first Neanderthal genome was sequenced, our ability to analyse ancient DNA has exploded. We now have high-quality genomes from multiple Neanderthal individuals, as well as from other archaic humans like the mysterious Denisovans. This has allowed scientists to move beyond simply saying we interbred, and to start asking a much more interesting question. What exactly did we get from them? What does this ghost in our genome actually do? The mainstream historical fact is that the Neanderthal DNA we carry is not evenly distributed or random. It is concentrated in very specific parts of our genetic code, suggesting that these inherited genes were not neutral, they were advantageous. They were kept by natural selection because they provided a tangible benefit to the Homo sapiens, who carried them as they moved into the new, challenging environments of Eurasia. In a very real sense, interbreeding with Neanderthals was a biological shortcut. It was a way for our ancestors to rapidly acquire genes that were already pre-adapted to life outside of Africa. So, what are these genes? A significant portion of the Neanderthal DNA in modern humans is related to our immune system, specifically genes that build proteins called toll-like receptors, which are crucial for identifying and launching a response against bacteria, fungi, and parasites. The Neanderthals had been living in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years, and their immune systems were finely tuned to the local pathogens. For the sapiens newcomers arriving from Africa, these pathogens were brand new and potentially deadly. Acquiring these pre-adapted immune genes from the Neanderthals would have been a massive survival advantage. So if you have a robust immune system that's good at fighting off certain kinds of infections, you may have a Neanderthal to thank for it. Another major area where their genetic legacy persists is in our skin and hair. Several of the genes we inherited from Neanderthals are involved in the production of keratin, a protein that is a key component of our skin, hair, and nails. These genes influence traits like skin tone, hair colour, and the skin's ability to withstand cold and UV radiation. Remember how some Neanderthals likely had pale skin and red hair as an adaptation to the low-light conditions of northern latitudes? By interbreeding, sapiens were able to quickly pick up these genetic adaptations, allowing them to better synthesize vitamin D and protect themselves in their new European home. So that thick head of hair or your skin's particular reaction to the sun could be part of your Neanderthal inheritance. But here's the quirky and more complicated part of the story. These genes, which were so advantageous in the Ice Age, can have some unexpected and sometimes negative consequences in our modern world. Our environments and lifestyles have changed dramatically, but our ancient genes have not. For example, some Neanderthal gene variants that boosted the immune system back then are now associated with a higher risk of autoimmune diseases like lupus, Crohn's disease, and type 1 diabetes. An immune system that was perfectly calibrated to fight off Paleolithic parasites can become overactive and attack the body itself in our modern, hyper-sanitized environment. The genetic legacy is full of these trade-offs. A Neanderthal gene that helped blood clot faster, a fantastic advantage when you're likely to be injured by a bison, is now linked to an increased risk of stroke and pulmonary embolism in modern populations. Other inherited variants are associated with a higher risk of depression, nicotine addiction, and certain allergies. It's a powerful reminder that a gene is not simply good or bad. Its effects are entirely dependent on the environment it's operating in. The scholarly debate today is not about whether we have these genes, but about the precise extent of their influence on our modern lives. It's a complex puzzle, as most traits are influenced by many genes and environmental factors. But every year, new studies are published linking another aspect of our modern human experience, from our sleep patterns to our susceptibility to certain viruses, to the silent ancient code we inherited from our extinct cousins. So, the Neanderthals are not truly extinct. A part of them lives on in billions of people today. They are in our blood, our skin, our hair, our immune responses. They are a tangible link to a lost world, a reminder that the story of humanity is not a simple tree with one main trunk, but a tangled, braided stream of different populations that met, mingled, and merged. The next time you fight off a cold, or get a sunburn, or even feel the winter chill on your skin, take a moment. you might just be feeling the faint 40,000-year-old echo of your inner Neanderthal. The ghost in your genome is the final, undeniable proof. The Neanderthals are not a separate, failed branch of the human story. They are a part of our own. They are a tributary that flowed into the great river of our species. Their story did not end 40,000 years ago. It just became quieter, subsumed into the larger narrative of Homo sapiens. And with that realization, our perception of them has to fundamentally shift. Their greatest legacy is not in their bones or their tools, but in how they force us to redefine what it means to be human. The journey we've taken tonight, from that first frosty encounter in the woods to the quiet domesticity of the rock shelter, has been a journey to erase a caricature. The mainstream historical fact of their legacy is the slow, painstaking demolition of the old brutish caveman myth. For a century, science portrayed them as shuffling, stupid and silent, a convenient foil to highlight our own supposed brilliance. But every discovery of the last few decades has added a new layer of complexity and humanity. The careful burials, the eagle talon jewellery, the use of medicinal plants, the mastery of fire and complex tools, the hints of language. All of these have transformed them from a clumsy beast into a person. They were a different kind of human, but they were, without question, human. Their story forces us to confront our own biases, our own need to see ourselves as the sole proprietors of intelligence and culture. They were not a dress rehearsal for us. They were a parallel performance, a different play being staged on the same world stage. Paleoanthropologists still debate whether to frame their story as one of failure or as one of immense long-term success. Did they fail because they ultimately vanished as a distinct group? Or were they one of the most successful human species of all time, thriving in one of the harshest environments on Earth for over 350,000 years? For comparison, our entire history of civilization, from the first cities to the present day, is only about 6,000 years long. Their tenure makes ours look like a fleeting weekend visit. It's tempting to indulge in a quirky bit of speculation. What if they hadn't disappeared? What would our world be like today if there were two distinct intelligent human species coexisting? Would we have different societies, different sports leagues? Would their spatially oriented brains have made them better architects or engineers? Maybe they'd be naturals at parallel parking. It's a fun science fiction thought experiment, but it underscores a profound point. Our world, our very definition of humanity, is shaped by the fact that we are the sole survivors. We are the lonely ones. For most of human history, the planet was a much more diverse place, with multiple human species living at the same time. We have forgotten what it is like to not be alone. The Neanderthal hunter, the figure who has been our guide on this journey, represents a path not taken. He represents a different way of thinking, a different way of perceiving the world. He was a master of the concrete, the immediate, the tangible. He would likely have no interest in our stock markets, our celebrity gossip, our abstract digital worlds. His reality was the weight of a spear, the scent of a bison on the wind, the warmth of the fire, the bonds of his clan. In a way, his legacy is a quiet reminder of a world we have lost, a world more physically and sensorially rich than the one we have built. He didn't need a bigger hat size just for show. That brain was a finely tuned instrument for a world that no longer exists. And so, his story ends not with a bang, but with a slow fade into our own DNA. He is a whisper in our blood, a silent contributor to our survival. He is a ghost who reminds us that our success was not guaranteed, that our path was not the only one, and that the family of humanity is richer and more complex than we ever thought. The fire in his shelter has long since gone out, but the embers still glow within us. And so the image of that solitary hunter standing at the edge of a primeval forest can finally begin to soften and recede, his watch now over. Allow the sharpness of the flint, the heavy weight of the spear, and the deep penetrating cold of the Ice Age to dissolve into the comfortable quiet of your room. The journey is complete, and the story is told. Let the details blur, as they are meant to, like ancient memories fading with the dawn. The vast windswept mammoth steppes can now give way to the gentle landscape of your own dreams. Let the scent of pine and wood smoke drift away, replaced by the familiar calming scent of your own pillow. Feel the comforting weight of your blanket, a safe and warm shelter against the long vanished night. There are no more beasts to hunt. No more fires to tend. Only the peaceful, easy rhythm of your own breathing. The world of the Neanderthal was a world of immense struggle, but your world, right now, in this moment, is one of perfect peace and stillness. Ease into that stillness. Let it cradle you. Let your thoughts become slow, heavy, and distant. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to see, only the gentle downward drift into a deep and restful sleep.